Couple more seconds. Got my tan line showing.
Yeah, me too. I got dark. I got some sun this weekend.
Hey,
My
everyone.
vitamin D,
Hey, everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. My guest today has been on my radar for quite some time, and it's such an honor to finally get to have him on the show. And I think he wins the award for best backdrop of any of the 600 guests that I've had on since the inception of Chef AJ Live. Please welcome to the show, Dr. Sunil Pai. It's so great to see you again. I forgot that we had met at the Peapod conference.
Yes, we did meet at the Peapod, and it was fantastic. And you were doing yoga and all sorts of wonderful things in the aisle before and after your wonderful lecture and presentation. So yes, it's been a while.
Great. That is really a beautiful backdrop, and it's about kind of what you're going to be talking about.
Yes, I'm going to be talking about inflammation in foods, and more importantly, if we have time after my presentation, we can talk about some of the natural anti-inflammatories, and spices is one of the things that we use a lot in our practice.
I can't wait, because inflammation is such a broad term, and you hear about it a lot, like almost every disease, itis, right?
Yep. You're walking right into my presentation, which is great. I mean, because I hope that the audience will be excited to listen to this and they go back and listen to it again and listen to it again. I do speak fast, and I will cover a lot because I want to have as much time as we can speak to your audience.
Absolutely. Well, if you'd like to share screen, I can't wait.
Sure. All right. So, we were talking about, I did write a book called An Inflammation Nation, and that's my area of specialty in integrative medicine. So let me go ahead and start this here. Let's see if this will work. Okay. And then over here. All right. Can you see that?
Perfect.
Perfect. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about my specialty as an integrative medicine physician. You can see my notes in my bio, probably the lower part of the page. But we want to talk about inflammation. What is inflammation? And knowing that it's the triggering mechanism of all diseases, and learn how you can basically reduce it naturally through diet. And also, if we have time, the use of natural anti-inflammatories. I wrote this book called An Inflammation Nation. It's available on Amazon. It's available on iTunes and Audible. And let's get started. So I want to first start out, I'm the guy who says follow the money a lot. And a lot of people who read my book, a lot of people who see my videos and everything understands that. It's understanding where we're at and how we got there is always important to understand where we should be now heading. And, we spent $4.1 trillion in healthcare last year, 18% of our GDP, $370 billion. It's a lot of money on prescription drugs. But with all that money being spent, again, being at the top in the world, what did that get us in terms of outcomes? Because we think like if we spend more, we should get more. Like, like if you spend more for a car, you should get a fancier car, right? So if you spend like hundreds of thousands of dollars, you might get a Ferrari, for example. But it seems like what happens is like we spend all this money and we didn't get a Ferrari, we got a Ford, or maybe an old Ford, for example. But what it did is that we rank now, in the bottom top 16 democracies from death from all causes. That means in the United States, we die more from infant mortality, homicides, teen pregnancy, HIV, AIDS, drug-related deaths, obesity, diabetes, heart disease, chronic lung disease, and disability, more than 16 other countries. And more importantly, actually, this data is a little bit old. I have to add another segment into this. I didn't get to change it this morning. But what we now are adding to that, which is dropping us now, is death from gunshots. Right. As you know, like every day there's gunshot wounds and shootings all over the place now, which is becoming commonplace. And this is also pulling us down in terms of one of our death from all causes is actually part of this homicides numbers going up. We are now ranking 34 out of 35 industrial nations and countries in terms of life expectancy. So we thought that we spent much more money, that we should be living longer as Americans. Like we should be living and getting the best healthcare, getting the best longevity. In fact, 34 countries, or 33 countries, by the way, do better than us. And what do we do in terms of overall ranking? Like how do we, if we take all the chronic diseases, not acute care, because we're still good at, unfortunately, if you do get shot, you want to go to hopefully you have a trauma center nearby. But outside that emergency room, just the general primary care conditions, we're now ranking 46 out of 48 industrial nations in terms of all diseases, A through Z. So who's 43, 44, and 45 ahead of us is Dominican Republic, Turkey, and Iran. So just to put things in perspective, like we talk about some of these things politically and some of these countries that we might be either, at adverse politics with, or, economics with, or they're poor and et cetera, but yet they're still having better chronic disease outcome than we are spending this much money. Now, where did this bring us, or how do we get here? Is because this is a big problem right now. Money has now controlled everything in terms of healthcare. It's private insurance companies, it's pharmaceutical companies, it's laboratory medicine, it's medical surgical devices. I just read an article this week. It was talking about private equity firms now owning physician groups, and they come in now and they're basically laying off healthcare workers. They're looking at profitability, and then they drop it, just like in a portfolio of stock. You kind of bring it up, you kind of shake the market up, you take the money and you leave. And this is kind of our healthcare is being kind of held hostage. Even more importantly, what's been happening more that we've seen recently is this COVID-19. So all of last year, up until now, and even now, unfortunately, which will be rising with the variants, is that it's been a challenge for most of us in the United States and worldwide to understand like what this virus is doing. But for me, it was very important because my book came out in 2014 and it did very well. But in 2020, my book did even better. And the reason being is because the word inflammation became a home, on the news. People were understanding inflammation from this aspect, that we understood that COVID, for example, triggered an inflammatory response, an inflammatory cascade of cytokine storm, just as altering the immune system, causing, all sorts of chronic problems. Acute to being people being on a respirator or having, heart conditions or other kind of life-threatening issues. But also right now we're looking at, 30% of the long hauler, which I now see in my practice and worldwide with our patients, is like chronic fatigue and memory problems and cognition problems and neuropathies. These are things that this inflammatory altering event is coming from a virus. So for me, it was good because it did bring out this idea of inflammation. And so why people were buying the book was they were trying to look at, well, what can I do to reduce it? Now from a different perspective, that wasn't just the diet and lifestyle, but it's actually from an external threat of a virus that is coming and that's still creating this pandemic. So when we look at, the United States now, where did we do? How did we do? Or how are we doing? Again, the largest economy spending $4 trillion in healthcare, and we're only 4% of the world's population, but we have 24% of the cases now. Now that's kind of decreased a little bit to 19% because of the vaccine, thankfully. Again, I'm recommending people to get the vaccine. I'm evidence-based, but right now the current deaths in the United States is 608,000 people. And I never thought in my lifetime that there would be such a large catastrophic event that's happening on a daily basis, that we're not actually kind of having a war against it. It's actually kind of dividing the country. But again, spending this much money and having this poor outcome, that we're not getting what we should be getting. And what this really allows us to understand is that what does this tell us is the state of American health is poor. And in fact, when WHO in January 2020, when they announced that this virus was coming out, the first thing that the head of WHO said, and it caught me because I was watching the announcement. He was like, "Oh, well, those people who have to worry about will be people who have hypertension, heart disease, diabetes, lung disease, and kidney disease, and obesity." And he just said it in passing because, he's coming from a place where he was from a country that didn't really have as much as we do. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, oh my God, we are in such trouble. And we are. I mean, 608,000 people. Now, when we look at things like these chronic comorbidities, the more comorbidities we have, just in general, just not even talking about just those issues being a problem, but now with the virus, it does cause even more issues. And 75% of our population now, 75% of our population over the age of 20 is overweight and obese. 42% are obese directly, and 9% are morbidly obese. Morbidly obesity means your BMI is over 40, which is basically about your 100 pounds over your maximum baseline body weight. 100 pounds. So 9% of the population right now means about 30 million people have 100 pounds more weight than they should normally have on the end of the scale. And 30 million people would be like 3.5 New York cities worth of people, right? So this is a big problem right now. And I probably, those who are watching or listening to this, when you think back 20 years ago, think back 30 years ago, we weren't as big. When you go to the store, if I go to a Walmart, if I go to a Target, if I go to just a normal restaurant now, we are a lot larger. In fact, what's happened over COVID is COVID now, we call it COVID-19, but it's actually like a 15 to 20 pound increase in weight that the average American, it was about half a pound every 10 days that when we were in quarantine, that we just ate a lot more, unfortunately, bad foods than we wanted to. So the average American gained about 20 pounds, 15 to 20 pounds over this 16-month period. So much so that, I don't know if you recently watched on the news, but the airlines are having a difficulty where they're looking at how are they going to have to now charge us more, because now each American weighs more. That's more weight. It's like carrying an extra piece of luggage on board, which actually puts the flight at risk. So they might have to actually be charging people by weight coming in the future. But when we look at all these comorbid conditions, hypertension, diabetes, cholesterol, these all immune system dysfunction, hypercoagulability, meaning like clotting issues, inflammation is increased just with obesity, but how your vascular system, your kidneys, your heart, your lungs, this is all contributing. So if you have one, it's a problem. But if you have many of these things, you're basically a target for having not only disease, but now being targeted for other diseases coming in like a virus. And one of the sad things, this will show you here of hospitalizations here is that as we get older, diabetes, chronic disease, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, we understand that because we see these things over time. But, the number one cause of the hospitalization in younger patients, 18 to 49, is obesity. So really getting our weight under control is key. And so what does this tell us is that we are an inflammation nation. Now, again, when I wrote this book a few years ago, this was quite controversial. People kind of got angry at me. They were like, "Oh, I don't want to see the country burning," and and I was trying to give this metaphor of not only the physical inflammation that we all have, but there's also an emotional inflammation right now that we know that's going on in the country. There's also an environmental inflammatory response. Right? There's wildfires and droughts, and so it's on a different level, spiritual, mental, physical, and actually the food that we eat that we have to be addressing inflammation. And hopefully, through this lecture, you can start reducing it. So inflammation is the triggering mechanism of all diseases. So you can see from autoimmune to neurological to cancer to cardiovascular, diabetes, now we're looking at, that COVID is a trigger that it triggers it. And then that trigger becomes a cycle where then it contributes to more inflammatory problems. And, it's basically been discussed as the fire within the body, right? And so when we look at that, the word inflammation is derived from the word inflammation comes from the word flam or fire. And as AJ, as you mentioned before, we were talking itis, I-T-I-S. So when we look at this wonderful kitchen here, and your bed and your living room, we need a certain amount of inflammation. We need a certain amount of heat. Your body needs some inflammation because it's going to tell us, okay, is it too hot? Is it too cold? Am I having pain or not? Is my pants too tight or is my shoes too tight? Am I stepping on something that might be sharp? So there's a certain amount of inflammation even that regulates your immune system functioning, right? So that's what we call normal response. But when we call uncontrolled inflammation, like a kitchen fire or your living room's fire, or your bed's on fire, then that's a problem. So when we look at acute versus chronic inflammation, acute inflammation is usually a good thing. I mean, a lot of times, like if we have an allergic reaction, the body's telling, hey, there's something that's toxic for you, right? Chemical irritants, we can have a trauma. We get that initial swelling. Say you sprain your ankle, the inflammatory response occurs. Your ankle gets swollen. The body's saying, do not move this. It's kind of making an artificial cast for your body to heal because of damage. So the acute is usually a good thing. Okay, in which there's the trauma and there's some kind of inflammatory response. The body's trying to repair itself. Even a fever is a good thing because you want the body to upregulate to fight an infection. We don't want to suppress fever unless it's above like 103, 104. Other than that, everybody's trying to take an acetaminophen for a 99, 100 fever, and actually the data will show that actually prolongs the illness of the child or the adult. Chronic inflammation, though, as you can see here, is underlying trigger of every single disease from chronic fatigue all the way up to cardiovascular disease. And that chronic inflammation, then when we say it leads to chronic diseases, for example, here's a knee and you have a normal knee, and then we have inflammation of that knee, the itis, and then we call it arthritis, degeneration of the joint. Here's a normal colon, and then we have a colitis or ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease where there's inflammation of the colon. Here's a vessel, a cardiovascular vessel, a heart vessel that's kind of cut in half. So we're looking, from the side of the tube that pumps blood to your heart. And as we eat a pro-inflammatory animal protein, high refined vegetable oil diet, the cholesterol that's pro-inflammatory sticks, and then we have this cardiovascular disease. Same thing when we look at now brain studies of now, remember, dementia, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, it is the leading cause of what's going to bankrupt our country by 2050 is that, a large percentage of the population is going to have now these neurodegenerative disorders. And we now find that Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia diseases are all pro-inflammatory states of the brain. A little bit of blood sugar being elevated, we call it type 3 diabetes, insulin resistance is a major contributing cause of this. Other pro-inflammatory things in our diet causes inflammation. Inflammation then ends up triggering beta amyloid, tau proteins, and tangles that cause these neurodegenerative diseases. Now, even when we look at, telomeres are these little end caps on your chromosomes, and they're important in the role of aging. And now we understand that inflammation actually shortens your telomeres. So the more inflammation you have, actually, the lower the lifespan that you have. And when the less inflammation you have, the longer you live. So now there is 200 different itises, as we mentioned before, AJ, before we were talking. And I always like to talk about it's kind of like the inflammation hokey pokey. in which, if I start from my head, like, people can have a dermatitis on their scalp, they can have red eyes, a conjunctivitis, they can have runny nose, a rhinitis, like sinus congestion, like a sinusitis, they can have a thyroiditis, they can have a sore throat, like a pharyngitis, or if you talk too much on the radio or you're speaking a lot, we can get laryngitis a lot. You can get bronchitis, you can get reflux and esophagitis, you can get stomach pain, like a gastritis, you can get colitis for both men and women, prostatitis in men, vaginitis in women, arthritis, etc. So just to give you an idea, from head to toe, we all have suffered on some level, purposely, non-purposely, lifestyle or environment or trauma, having some kind of itis. But now the problem is that Western medicine has usually a drug, a treatment to lower the inflammation, but it's never stopping at the root cause of what's causing inflammation. So we can give you pain pills, we can give you steroids, we can give you immunosuppressive agents, but that's never stopping what is triggering the inflammation. And my book goes out into detail of what are the 10 epigenetic steps that you need to do to reverse diseases by looking at lowering inflammation itself and doing diet, lifestyle, environmental, belief system changes. So inflammation now is also a pathway to cancer. So 43%, so almost 50% of people who have ulcerative colitis will develop a colorectal cancer in about 30 years, because that chronic inflammation causes cellular damage. Those polyps have a higher risk, and those other inflammatory aspects of changes in the colon can turn into cancer. Active rheumatoid arthritis, over 10 years, those patients have a 71-time higher rate of getting a lymphoma, cancer, than the regular population. And even certain things like HPV, which we now understand COVID as a virus, but a lot of people just thought of this virus as like HPV, EBV, CMV. But HPV, we always look at, when we do like pap smears and stuff like that, women's health, we're looking at, the HPV in the cervical tissue. Not everybody will get cancer, but there's a higher risk, and then it can take 10 to 20 years to turn into cervical cancer. And now there's things that we can actually give to actually help reverse and reduce the rate of that transmission of the cervical tissue having HPV. We actually can make it go to negative and actually help improve the actual cervical tissue cells. But what we really want to focus in on, because everybody's looking at gene therapy, you listen to the news, everything's about genes and genes and genes, but genes is very little. Genes is less than, at the time they had this in 2009, it was 5 to 10%. And then when I wrote my book, the data came out as about 3%. So it's only 3% of genes are like genetically related diseases. But when we look at cancer and chronic diseases, you can see here, diet is the highest amount. Tobacco use, which hopefully we want people to smoke less. But, as we were talking before, vaping is, and all these things are now coming up to be higher in the youth of the population. And then obesity, infections, meaning immune systems not functioning well, environmental pollution, and, like looking at trying to get more organic foods and less chemicals in the environment, less glyphosate, Roundup. So we want to focus on the 97% that you can control, which is just lifestyle changes, right? Now, what is inflammation and where does it like to go? So I live in New Mexico. I live in Albuquerque. We have these beautiful Southwestern style Adobe type homes. The unfortunate thing is that they also have flat roofs. They leak because we don't have pitch like everybody else has around the world. And so I always use this analogy in my book, like the rain is inflammation, our body's a flat roof, and it just collects there and it just looks for the weakest link of the body. That's where inflammation likes to go. So there's 4 places that inflammation likes to go. Number 1 is trauma. So think of your roof and think of it, say if there's a little bit of damage to the roof and then you have a roof repaired, it's never 100% fixed. And if it's going to rain and the rain's going to go back on the roof, where it's going to go back to the place of previous damage. So for example, a lot of people will have like a sports injury, or maybe in college, or maybe they got in a car accident, or maybe they served in the military, or whatever it may be, and maybe fell off a horse here in Santa Fe, for example, or whatever. That back injury, that knee injury, now 20 years later, 30 years later, 40 years later, 50 years later, they're having inflammation there, but they're not playing football. They're not in a car accident. They're not falling off a horse still. It's the food and the environment that is still coming in that's triggering that inflammatory response to go to that previous damaged spot. So we always have to look at, it's not aging that is causing the problem. It's time of getting more inflammation that is causing the problem. Pathology means disease. And pathology, think of a tree falling on the roof. And then once a tree falls on the roof, there's a crack. Every time it rains, it's got to go there. So that's the other one. Overuse. So we understand overuse like exercise. Exercise is very wonderful. We all want to exercise. You want to do yoga, you want to do Tai Chi, Qigong, you want to do some cardiovascular, maybe some weight training. That's a healthy inflammatory, that little bit of soreness. But the problem is that most people are eating such a pro-inflammatory diet that they're very, very sore afterwards. And then they're taking ibuprofens, and then they're trying to take all these other medications, or they don't exercise because every time they exercise, they get a negative response. Like, I'm just too sore, I'm aching too much. So we want to look at, how do we reduce that inflammation? Now, some people have jobs like carpal tunnel and plantar fasciitis. They're on construction, they're on their feet, or someone that's working at a checkout, at a big box store, they can have that repetitive motion. So the overuse can cause inflammation. And then the food that we eat will then trigger that inflammation to last longer. Lastly, the fourth place where inflammation likes to go is places where your immune system is not paying attention. So what that means is that when we have low natural killer cell function, when people are stressed, even in the wintertime, as you see, people's immune system goes down. That's why viruses are more prone, like flus and colds in the wintertime, is that our immune system is low. So we like to focus in on our practice on what are the things that are evidence-based that you can take that will improve, strengthen your natural killer cell function. Vitamin D is one of the simplest things that everybody should be looking at. Everybody should be testing for vitamin D. Everybody should either getting 10 to 15 minutes of sun exposure every day, not in the burn time, but early morning, late afternoon, and also taking a vitamin D supplementation and getting to that targeted range between 60 and 100 is what we look at. But make sure that you have your physician or someone follow that. And then when we look at all the different things that are contributing, which my book will cover, smoking, solar radiation, alcohol. Alcohol is a big thing because this year there was 3 large studies that came out, even the WHO, now recommending that we shouldn't be consuming alcohol at all, which is kind of unfortunate because, it's a social thing that almost every single culture has. And so that's probably going to be one of the hardest challenges now moving forward, because we can now start moving people easily on eating better, because once they eat better, they feel better. But socially, it's going to be a little bit more challenged. And so we are telling people to reduce the consumption of alcohol. As you can see in the middle, the standard American diet, which I'll talk about, obesity, the viruses, and we now understood that, COVID was being a virus, but also, different types of bacteria and, fungal infections and parasites, environmental pollution, which is a big problem right now. And one thing that we've all experienced even more so over the last 60 months is stress. My book will cover all those things and how to help reduce that. But today, what I'm going to talk about is just the main things about inflammation and diet. But these are some of the 10 steps that I do cover in my book. And we'll even hopefully have some time to talk about Bosmeric and how you can use a natural anti-inflammatory in addition to your plant-based diet on getting better. So I just want to talk about first now, what are we eating, right? Just to kind of set to why do we need to change? Well, the average American is eating the following per day. That's per day. Remember, this is per day, per person, as a pound of animal protein. That means beef, chicken, pork, fish, and eggs, a pound. 2 pounds of cheese and dairy products per person per day on average. That means some people are eating more, 2 pounds, okay? Half a pound of refined flour, half a pound of veggies, usually in the form of French fries. And again, ketchup is being now consumed as the second most consumed vegetable. So believe it or not, now ketchup is considered a vegetable because it's used so much. Okay, usually it has tons of sugar. Usually it's non-organic and whatnot, has corn syrup and whatnot. So, and the average person is consuming about 18 ounces of soda, a third of a pound of GMO sugar and corn sweeteners. That's usually in those sweetened beverages and candies, and about an ounce of artificial sweeteners like the blue, pink, and yellow packets, which my book will cover the detail of why those things are not good for us. Now, when we look at this omega-3 and omega-6 ratio, and everybody heard about omega-3s, 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 fish oil, and now we're talking about plant oils. But omega-3s are anti-inflammatory, right? And we can get it from our diet easily from, flax seeds, chia seeds, hemp seeds, walnuts, for example. Great sources, by the way. Some people were eating fish, which we're not recommending. But this industry came out and to give us more omega-3s. Now, why? It's because in 1950, 1960, the average person ate about 1-to-1 ratio, meaning they had a lot of omega-3s, and then occasionally they'd have omega-6. So we go through all the week, the average American would have maybe some beef, pork, chicken, lamb. It was a roast. It was on Sunday. Dad got raised in the 50s, and that was a celebration or after church, something like that. So like we had this food that we feasted on, but the rest of the week we kind of famine. It wasn't very accessible. But over time, the food got cheaper and cheaper due to industrial processing of food, factory farming, etc. And so what we now started seeing is that in 2012, the number of omega-6s almost went up to about 35%. And then when we saw in southern states, like this is like Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, is that they almost have a 70-to-1, 70 times more omega-6s. Omega-6s are animal proteins and also the highly refined vegetable oil. So when they're saying like fried chicken or double deep fried chicken with the Twinkie in there, somewhere in between, these are the problems where that whole push. The industry was saying, well, let's just eat omega-3s. Let's just sell you, omega-3 fatty acids, whether from fish or plants. But our main thing is that we want to reduce the omega-6s in the diet. Then you can just eat the omega-3s or take a plant oil. You don't need to have such high amounts. And so this is the problem of what we're starting to see. Now, why do we have so much omega-6s in our diet? Because it's cheap food. right? My book will cover all of this, but it's really interesting because, when you want to know, like, how can you get a dollar menu food? How can you have a bucket of chicken for $20? Now, I live in the 50th poorest state in the nation. Okay. So we understand poor, we understand the economy being bad, especially during COVID. So I understand that, a family of four saying, okay, I have $20, I can fill a bucket of chicken with sides, and I got, two kids and stuff like that. I understand, the economics of this. However, we have to understand that cheap food just causes you more in health expenditures later. Now, interesting enough, in my book, I'll also cover the insurance companies. This is a great thing. 11 of the top insurance companies, health insurance, life insurance, and disability insurance, owns about 2 billion stocks of fast food industry. So they got you coming in, they got you coming out. So I always tell people, you're not here by default of your disease. You're here by design. What I mean is that there's been marketing from food industry, from drug companies, and from hospital medicine, that we keep people kind of stuck in this loop of perpetual thinking that I'm supposed to get diabetes, heart disease, and cancer, and obesity, and eventually have some kind of dementia as you get older. But that's not true when you look at the worldwide data, right? And furthermore is, for those who say, well, Dr. Pai, and I used to be this guy. I'm always honest with my patients. Before I went plant-based in 2006, I was the foodie guy where, my beef came from Japan. It was massage therapist was, rubbing it. And my fish came from a special fishery in Alaska that Dr. Weil would recommend. And my eggs came from Taos, where they're all organic kumbaya. They do yoga, for example. So I was that guy. But we understand it's like that what we thought was clean food did not get us anywhere further. In fact, the data shows statistically no significance between eating organic meats, clean people would say clean foods, versus the regular conventional factory farm foods. No really change, because we're not going to have the important things that we'll talk about later. But the book will talk about, for those people who want to know, like, I want people to understand their food, because we always want to know where our iPhones are made and where our Nike shoes and where our clothes are being made. We're so conscious about some of these other products, but the thing that we're putting in day out, we don't know that, that most of the pork now in the United States is grown here, shipped 7,000 miles to China, it's processed in China, and shipped back. And it's cheaper now than it's ever been. So what does that tell us? That means something along the way in processing is making the pork not really pork, or they're adding other things to the pork that shouldn't be there. Otherwise, we'd just be processing these things here. How most of the farm wild-caught salmon right now that you go to the store, health food store, or high-end grocery market, is actually not wild-caught. It's actually farm-raised. And my book will explain how they can make the tanks, how they can take it and they add astaxanthin, and how they can drop it in the water and pick it up 20 feet later. And it's called wild-caught, and it's basically colored with a carotenoid pigment, and you're basically getting farm-raised fish. 40 to 60% by 3 independent agencies have now shown that all the health food stores and all the seafood markets now have mislabeled the fish. And it's not on purpose. It's from even the fisheries that are selling, right? So there's a lot of, what I call scamming in the market. I'll talk about muglu. And muglu is a blood enzyme that's used from beef or pork. And we can take scraps of meat, say here, steaks, all the ends and the tips, and actually you can put this muglu product. You can even buy it on Amazon. A lot of the fancy restaurants use it now. You can even get gluten-free kind, some that are even blessed by a rabbi, and just interesting enough. But you can put it together, and actually will glue the meat together, and then they can preform make steaks. And the data will show that most of the restaurants now, when you see a $9.99 all-you-can-eat steak and shrimp thing, those are not real steaks. That's just basically parts of the animal that have been put together, selling it to you cheap. Unfortunately, when I wrote my book, I was talking about GMOing of the fish, and that was hopefully going to be blocked, and it wasn't blocked. In fact, they have now introduced the actual GMO fish. This is the GMO fish here. This is the regular salmon. This is the GMO salmon into the population, into the environment. And so we will now see that we are now the experiment of what this may be changing and altering in the environment, not only in ourselves, but actually into the animal ecosystem. The difference, my book will cover the difference between grass-fed finished. But interesting thing, when people say, oh, I'm eating grass-fed finished, Dr. Pai, I'm not just eating grass-fed, because then they take the animal and feed it in the corn lot, and they claim it as grass-fed. It needs to be grass-fed finished. But 70% now, up to 70% of all the grass-fed beef now is actually eating and consuming a GMO grass that's actually from Scott's, which is a Monsanto division, right? I'll talk about chicken. I'll talk about even how when you have ground beef at the store, what they call this atmospheric changes, where they can actually use this gases, a CO2 gas, carbon monoxide gas, that actually will make the kind of old meat look fresher. And actually can stay up to several months before it turns back. So there's ways that we can actually have really bad food. So a lot of people are getting foodborne illness. 1 in 4 people will get foodborne illness. Now it went up a little bit higher last year, just due to the way the food's being handling. And then when people go out to eat, I always like to tell people, people like Dr. Pai, I eat all beef patties. I just, I'm not going to eat vegetables. I'm not going to, I'm not going to go plant-based. And so there's studies that, showed, from a forensics journal where they actually took the top 8 fast food chains and, when they looked at like the all beef patty, for example, 2 quarter-pounder cheeseburgers, and looked at all the Taco Bell, the KFCs to Wendy's and all, the range of meat is 2 to 14.8%. So basically, 85 to 98% of the meat patty is not meat, right? So then you have to think of like, what is it? It's all the other stuff that you don't want to know. If you want Google moo glue and you look at all these other things, you'll be disappointed. So also, when we look at the consumption of animal protein, as we see, 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 women in their lifetime now will have cancer. 1 in 2 men, 1 in 3 women in their lifetime will have cancer, which is not there when I was in medical school, over 30 years ago. Now we're looking at the food being a contributing factor, and there's something called insulin growth factor, which is triggering. Especially we find it highest in dairy, but it's also found in other animal proteins. It stimulates growth, right? And cancer cells have 10 to 12 times more insulin receptors. So there's a direct correlation between the higher the intake, the higher the rate of cancer can happen. Actually, WHO actually classified more recently in the last 2 years meat as a carcinogen. So it's actually as deadly on the the carcinogen list as tobacco, as asbestos, as diesel fumes. So an example would be here, like eating 3.5 ounces of red meat increases colon cancer by 17%. Now here in New Mexico, like people will go to the Waffle House or something. They have what they call the construction man's breakfast. It's like a 22 ounce steak for breakfast, right? So that's already like almost 7 times that. So you can understand like why the rate of colon cancer is so high. 1.7 ounces of processed meats out of all the meat. Processed meat's the worst. That means like delis and deli meats and sausages and pepperonis. It's the worst. So only an ounce and 1.7 ounces increases the colon cancer rate 18%. And so when you think of a meat topping pizzas, 12 to 18 grams of slice, average person has 3 slices of a pizza. So they're already like 3 times this risk already just having one meal of a meat lover's pizza. So when we look at colon cancer now, colon cancer being the number 2 cause of cancer in both men and women, we can understand why we only have it here. Interesting thing, there's a study here that's been published, and I'll put in my next upcoming book. But there's a study where they took the patients in Africa, and they keep on showing this at the different conferences because it's such a well-done study. They took them for rural Africa. They don't have colon cancer in these areas of rural Africa. They don't eat hardly any animal protein, and they eat super high amounts of fiber in their diet. If they just took these patients and they took them to Chicago, and they had this crossover, so they standard American fare for 2 weeks. They did a colonoscopy and biopsies of their colon and blood tests. No inflammation, no issues with the colon. They fed them the standard American diet for 2 weeks, and after 2 weeks, all the inflammatory markers are up, and they already have pre-neoplastic lesions already developing in the colon in 2 weeks. Then when they switched them back to their diet and they had them feed their regular standard diet of their culture, which is high in fiber, high in fruits and vegetables and grains and legumes, it returns back to normal. So just 2 weeks it only takes to actually either start insulting the colon, and then over time we have this colon cancer being number 2, or 2 weeks of just changing it, and you can improve your health moving forward. Now, major things just to know is atherosclerotic plaque. So cardiovascular disease, 3 people every minute will have a heart attack in America. And so aside of COVID, deaths, which is, very high, still the number 1 cause of death in America is heart disease. Okay. An interesting thing, the cancer conference I was at talking about nutrition, they looked at the number 3 cause of death, which is cancer right now. Okay. COVID's number 2. So number 3 cause is cancer. In the cancer patients in 2019, and in 2020 data, those are the last 2 data sets they're able to look at, most recent, is that the number 1 cause of death in cancer patients in 2019 and 2020 was not cancer, it was heart disease. So, they're going to give them chemo, surgery, radiation, or we try to help them with other natural things along the way to improve their outcome. But if no one's looking at what they're eating, they still will die from the number 1 cause of death, which is heart disease. So we know that eating an animal protein, eating a standard American diet, eating a ketogenic diet, eating a paleo diet just leads to heart disease and a higher risk of strokes and other issues in cancer. Eating a vegetarian diet is somewhat better, but we now know going completely plant-based, within 6 months, we can see reversal of cardiovascular health on angiograms, and we have wonderful patient studies that we can show of reversal of that. And deficiencies in our diet. So a lot of people say, well, gosh, our food is giving us what we need. No, and in fact, in the standard American diet, you can see here is that this is the percent of the human population that's not in the United States, not meeting just the recommended daily minimum amounts. I mean, remember, RDAs are the tiny amounts that you just barely need for disease. Look at this, how much calcium and folate and iron and magnesium and all the Bs and vitamin Cs and E. And this is such a deficiency here. And it's because the animals are factory farmed, and yes, which is still 97%. So when I have people like, oh, I eat grass-fed or I eat organic or something like that, I say, no, you're not eating every single meal, because every time you go out, it's not that. Fiber is only found in plants. And so I'll come back to this, but it's really for improving the diversity of your microbiome. More importantly, not only just evacuating the stool, but it actually helps remove the toxins. And so when people have a low fiber diet, which is the standard American diet, ketogenic, and also paleo diets, is that they have this what they call increased enterohepatic circulation. Fiber is what actually helps bind these bile acids and helps bile salts, and it actually helps bind the toxins, meaning hormones that we're getting from our foods. And in fact, interesting thing is with foods we're talking about is at the conference just recently I was at, the oncology section, they were looking at dairy and how much dairy can cause hormonal related cancers, because women are worried about estrogen positive breast cancer. 3 servings of dairy a day, meaning having some cheese in your eggs, maybe having some or milk on your cereal, maybe having a piece of pizza, maybe enchilada, or something like some cheese or a piece of yogurt, and then 2 little servings of butter, meaning like in a pan or something on a toast, right? Because they usually will cook foods with butter. Has the same amount of estrogen, 40% of estrogen and 60% of estrogen of progesterone as a single birth control pill. That's 3 servings of dairy, 2 servings of butter, which the average person I said is doing 2 pounds, right? And that's just dairy. We're not talking about the beef and the other animal protein. So we can understand why we see this rise of these hormonal related cancers in both men and women. And by not having the daily bowel movement, the more bowel movements you have, 2 to 3, even estrogen positive breast cancer women will have the long survival, because it's just the body's removing what it needs. Detoxification, and anybody says, oh, you need to do a detox. I'm so tired of that word. It's overdone. Detoxification is having 2 to 3 well-formed bowel movements by eating enough plant-based foods. That's all what it is. And actually, true detoxification is Ayurvedic. Ayurvedic medicine actually has panchakarma, which we are one of our specialties that people who are interested in panchakarma, that's a whole detoxification, but that's real detoxification. That means doing like body therapies, mind therapies, meditation, yoga, do a series of body treatments. So that's something that's been practiced for about 4,000 years. It's a specialty on how to move it. It's not just a colon cleanse that most people will get at the health food store. More importantly, more research now in the last few years, because we're learning about microbiome, is that there's something called endotoxins, and endotoxins trigger inflammatory responses that come from meat. But it's not just, when we think of endotoxins, people are thinking like, oh, well, is it just a bacteria? Like, is it because it's like rare meat, or, should I cook it more? No, when you cook it, you boil it, you even fry it, you put a stomach acid, it doesn't kill endotoxins. Endotoxins causes this dysfunction of your microbiome, causing leaky gut, causing inflammatory responses, leading to more of the obesity and diabetes and all these other pro-inflammatory cytokines and immunological factors. So, there's no benefits of that. So this is the main slide I want to stay on, because I tell people this all the time. When people say, well, Dr. Pai, I must eat this, or I need this or need that. And I always just tell people that the argument or the discussion, however you want to phrase it, is that you just need to know, are you eating an anti-inflammatory diet or a pro-inflammatory diet? And then I can just drop the mic and I can leave the room, because really it's that simple. If you understand inflammation, you'll understand why you'd be eating more this way of a plant heavy diet, or even a full whole food plant-based diet, which we're recommending, and avoiding this. Now, animal protein increases inflammation. We want to reduce it. Plants do that. Animal protein has cholesterol. And again, 3 people every minute. Number 1 cause of death still in America and worldwide is heart disease. So plants don't have cholesterol. That's why you can reverse heart disease just by going on a plant-based diet. Antioxidants, there's very little antioxidants in animal protein, because remember, most of them are factory farmed. Plants are just high in antioxidants. Phytonutrients, phyto meaning plant, there's none because it's not a plant, right? So, and I'll show you a slide next of what a phytonutrient is. Remember, there's no fiber. We need the fiber. And, this increases dysbiosis and endotoxins. So by not having fiber, we need the fiber. Plants only have fiber. So anything that's a plant, vegetable, grain, legume, or fruit has fiber. Fiber increases your microbiome diversity. And in fact, just 2 weeks now, there's other studies showing that, how can we start flipping this pro-inflammatory GI tract into an anti? Is 2 weeks. So it's not like, so people come to me like, I'm 65 years old, I've been eating this one way. How, I don't have 60 years to change. I go, no, you have 2 weeks. Can you spare 2 weeks? Most people spared 16 months, being at home. So, in quarantine. So we can do a lot of wonderful things. These are the things that we want to avoid. Heterocyclic amines, TMAO, IGF-1, and new 5G6. These are things that actually are linked to increased cancer growth. This is from grilling. This is from the barbecuing. This is the charring. This is from the choline in the eggs, converting in the microbiome into the liver. Stimulates here insulin growth factor. And this is something new that's in the literature, is looking at our bodies actually developing a type of antibody against meat, which is very interesting, that links to colon cancer and other types of cancer. Okay. Heme iron, unfortunately, a lot of times people would say, hey, you're anemic. Say someone who's pregnant or someone's having heavy menstrual cycles. Hey, you need to eat steak. Doctors say you need to eat steak. Now we understand that iron that comes from animal protein is pro-inflammatory, is atherogenic, meaning it causes cardiovascular disease, and it actually triggers more cancer growth. So plant iron doesn't do that. So you can get all the plant iron you get from greens. Okay, so eating, there was a whole discussion like heme iron is better absorbed. It's better absorbed by 10%. And they made this huge argument for decades. And so just, have some more greens. Interesting thing, the last conference I was at just a week ago, they were talking about this. A lot of the research now is showing something about why we have this diabetes, why we have this blood sugar problem, and 70% having this insulin resistance. And it's called intramyocellular lipids, meaning when we eat animal protein and also the animal fats, what happens is like, bacon, all the oils and fats, it actually accumulates in our tissue, our muscle tissue, and that increases the insulin resistance, meaning the blood sugar dysregulation, and also increases your advanced glycation end products. These are things that causes clogging, it causes inflammation, it causes dysfunction. But the diabetes, and out of all the animal proteins, they also did studies on looking at oils, right? Because we always want to look at, is there healthier oils, even though we were trying to eat lower oil? I know, Chef, AJ, you want to be low oil as well. But when we're looking at oils, the one that actually sticks in the tissue the most, aside of animal protein, right? So animal protein is bad, and animal fats are bad, is palm oil. And palm oil is like now the number one, generic oil that's unfortunately being, devastating the Amazon. They're pillaging, the forest for growing this cheap palm oil. But you'll see now palm oil has become the new corn syrup, right? It's become the new high fructose corn syrup. It's in every cookie, candy, even vegan food. It's still, put in there, all the fried stuff. And palm oil is actually a larger disruptor as well. So even if you want plant-based, you want to be avoiding any package that says palm oil, because that actually will cause insulin resistance in your body. And lastly, when we talk about pro-inflammatory foods, there's bioaccumulation, pesticides, herbicides, in the sea, dioxins, PCBs, and heavy metals, and antibiotics and hormones. This is all in animal protein. Now, even if someone's saying I'm eating organic, guess what? There are herbicides and pesticides that are still being put in fertilizers, right? And or the GMO grasses, right? And even in animals, when people have bone broth, for example, which has been my nemesis for many years, because so many patients come to me who have cancer, like, oh, I saw this on some kind of, docu-series, or someone on the internet, social media is selling, bone broths, but, they all have heavy metals, pesticides, herbicides. The studies even in organic, because that's where biologically those things store in the animal, is in bones. So if you're just eating a highly concentrated form of bones, then they have the toxins go along. So if aliens come down tomorrow and eat us humans and make human bone broth, they're going to get toxicity from us as well. So it's something that you're not getting any nutrients from. This is just industry selling you products that are byproducts that actually used to throw away. Now they can actually package and sell the kind of the garbage to people. And remember, it's acidic. So the data will show also now that we're understanding with microbiome and just looking at the overall alkalinity acidity balance. You don't need to buy a fancy water machine. You don't have to buy all these kind of gimmicky things. You just need to be eating more plant-based foods, which overall puts your body in an alkaline state. So in general, animal protein does not prevent, treat, or reverse disease. It only increases disease. So there's no drug that we make that is, a chicken prescription. There's no beef prescription. There's no, fish prescription. In fact, it's a fatty acid of the omega-3. It's not fish protein. So everybody thinks that we need to eat this animal protein, but there's no drug that we give that does that. In fact, all the drugs that we give, or herbs that we give, or nutraceuticals we give, is only from plant foods that actually prevents, treats, and reverses diseases. So, going back to what is a phytonutrient, because a lot of people don't understand that word. So when you think of all the wonderful colors, red and orange, you see this rainbow colored here, and you think of like tomatoes and carrots and citrus and spinach and broccoli and, and blueberries and grapes and all the legumes and beans. These are the phytochemicals, the phytonutrients that are not found in animal protein, like lycopene and beta carotene and vitamin C, flavonoids and folate and indoles and allyls and anthocyanins and reserve. These are all the things now that then are patented, put into pills, and then we go to the health store and we sell it back to people. because they're not eating the food. So it's like people are like, oh, I need to take, my resveratrol. I need to take my, but it's like, well, you should be eating those foods. Now, when we look at in our practice, we actually measure these things. We actually will find out deficiencies. And then when we give us any kind of dietary supplement, it's only for a targeted reason, but we then have to follow a study of like, the patent, looking at the dosage and the potency on, does that patient actually need it? But when we actually look at nutrient testing, we actually will say, here are the foods that you should be eating first, because we want to avoid redundancy. We only want to give things that have a targeted effect, that's safe, natural, clinically effective. And the diet, first and foremost, is the thing that everybody has to change. Most people would come to see me. We actually give them a 3-hour video. They have to watch the video. We recommend them read the book, because I want people to get full on board. I tell people I'm not only an integrative physician, I'm like a Olympic athlete coach. And I only want people to get gold. I'm not here to train people to get bronzes and silvers when they come to my practice. So whether they have cancer, whether they have diabetes, heart disease, it's not just kind of partly making, it's not just having it under control. It's not having it managed. They can go elsewhere. If people say, I want to overcome my disease, then you have to be all in. Like nobody who gets a gold now in Tokyo at the Olympics, they didn't just wake up, being this wonderful athlete. They've trained so we just see them like for this 1 week and like, wow, they're so strong, they're so fast. These people every day and night are practicing and training. So I tell people every day is a training to keep your body healthy. You have to do making the better decisions every single day. And this is kind of my recommendations for most of my patients. And so hopefully when people watch this, they can pause this and kind of take a look at it. But basically 4 servings of fruits, maybe a tablespoon of seeds, herbs and spices, which we'll talk about, whole grains, 3 servings, vegetables, 5 servings a day, about an ounce of nuts or less a day, and legumes, almost at every meal, 3 servings of legumes. These are all the different types of fruits. These are all the type of whole grains, vegetables, and nuts and seeds. So hopefully, pause this screen when you watch this on YouTube, and then, you can take this back, print it out, and really look at, these are the things that we should be eating. Because a lot of people, what I find, Chef AJ in my practice is that, I find it myself too when I was going plant-based, is that we all get stuck, like we all have our 2 favorite fruits and vegetables and greens and legumes and all. And I tell people like, when you talk about berries, like blueberries, strawberries, blackberry, raspberries, bilberries, cranberries, boysenberries, goji berries, there's so many berries, cherries, acai fruit, dragon fruit, mangoes, bananas, oranges, apples, pears, tangerines, watermelon, cantaloupe, peaches. Wow. A lot of people go to stores like apples, oranges, like that's all they think of, like we want to be eating as much of these fruits as possible, as much of the colors as possible, as much of the skins, washing it, try to get organic if possible. Look at the environmental working group, Dirty Dozen. Legumes. So a lot of people just think of beans, think of black beans, pinto, red, garbanzo, kidney, navy, cannelli, lima, mung beans. Peas is a bean. Or a legume, sorry. Lentils, so brown, red, and yellow, and green. So all the dals that you can think of, all the mung beans. Soybeans, soy milk, tofu, tempeh, edamame. But those should be organic. 94% of soy is GMO, so always get organic. Otherwise, I don't touch it. With the seeds, chia, flax, hemp, with the grains, a lot of people are stuck. They're like, well, look at teff, quinoa, amaranth, oats, millet, barley, spelt, kamut, wheat berries, rice. And everything's just white rice because that's what they were sold. No, red rice, volcanic rice, brown rice, black rice, forbidden rice, which is purple, jade rice, which is green, basmati rice. There's tons of different type of, and I'm probably missing a bunch of other grains from other cultures, by the way. So forgive me for any of these fruits or vegetables because, this is from what I can get locally. There's other places that, if I was on the East Coast or West Coast or other cultures, they have a variety more vegetables that we have. Vegetables here, we're looking at leafy greens, chard, kale, spinach, collard greens, sprouts, sunflower, radish, mustard, alfalfa, pea shoots, green lentils, wheat, clover, broccoli sprouts, onions, all the different types of onions, all the different types of garlic, all the different types of mushrooms. So these are the things that people can eat unlimited. They won't gain weight. These are really low caloric but nutrient dense foods. And so we want to make sure that we are getting these servings per day. So when I always want to kind of show this, I always say, like, when people say, well, where do you get your protein? That's the number one question that people will get. Or say, I would say, like, where are you getting your anti-inflammatory protein? Where are you getting your phytonutrients? Where are you getting your fiber? Where are you getting your antioxidants? And hopefully people will understand that this is where we should be heading. And this is the kind of diet that we should be looking at, reducing all types of inflammation. So now I want to switch to kind of how we practice and what truly integrative medicine is. More recently in the last couple of years, you've been hearing a lot of things about naturopathic medicine and holistic medicine. That was kind of really popular for a long time. And naturopathic medicine is naturopathic doctors who go to a naturopathic school, and they learn a lot about supplements and natural herbs, which is great. And we like to step it up further because we like to look at potency, purity, safety, efficacy. So we're really specific at what types that we use, where do we manufacture it, is it at a clinical dose so that we have a clinical efficacy. And that's where a lot of people, unfortunately, in all of this industry are not trained. They're just kind of trained to, like, a rep will come in their office, instead of selling drugs, they're selling supplements, and they just kind of go with whatever's there or whatever they have the highest margin for their practice. We do opposite. We have about 40 different contract manufacturers in our practice for our products, and we look at what was the study and can I get it directly from the manufacturer, not have third party touching it, and so that I can get everything in a certified GMP facility and follow the clinical studies. When I see a patient and we're trying to remove and change their drugs to using more natural therapies and eventually just be on a diet and lifestyle change by itself, that's our specialty. But holistic natural medicine is something that is incorporated in integrative medicine in our practice. One of my areas that people read about in the book through my story and my personal experience with foods is food sensitivities or food allergies. We always want to look at, even if you move to a plant-based diet, your body can still have a problem with a plant, vegetable, grain, or legume. And so we always want to look at testing and looking at, what we call an IgE and an IgG4, immediate and delayed reactions to something that you might be eating. Although the data might be great, Chef AJ might make a great recipe, I might look at the research and say it's a fantastic thing. And for that patient, they might eat it, even if it's a plant, it still can trigger an inflammatory response. So we look at it like making individualized medicine, looking at like making sure that you're on a complete anti-inflammatory diet. Otherwise, sometimes people say, I try to eat plant-based, and I had someone just the other day, they came in, they had a problem with avocados and they had a problem with kale. These are things that people are saying, like, add a little bit of healthy fat, okay, a little bit of avocado, or have kale, more kale. Kale is the superfood, whatever. And they were actually making their Crohn's disease worse, right? So it was a pro-inflammatory response. And there's ways that we can actually help reverse that food sensitivity and also desensitize the person over time with rotation and other things like that. We also use, a lot of traditional, what I call traditional medicines. I consider Western medicine a lot alternative, and the reason why I use that is because Western medicine's only been around for like, a couple hundred years. But when you look at Ayurvedic medicine, Chinese medicine, we use a lot of what called neuroacupuncture. There's a recent documentary film that I'm proud to be part of. It's called A Return to Life. If people want to know about how neuroacupuncture helps for stroke, Parkinson's, MS, autism, cerebral palsy, traumatic brain injury, go to neuroacupunctureinstitute.org. And if you're especially a medical provider, if you're an acupuncturist, DOM, or a physician, we do training, and we do training where you can certify in a specific type of technique to train those people. Well, our specialty in our practice, with my partner, Dr. Sutton, she actually is a doctor of Ayurvedic medicine, and we do all the panchakarma, we do all the lifestyle, the yoga, the meditation, the pranayama, and the use of the therapies effectively. And then when you look at regenerative medicine, which is also popular, regenerative medicine, people are trying to do like, how do I get my stem cells, or like in my joints to get better, or how do I regenerate my joint? But we can do that with diet. We can actually do natural products that do that. We don't need to do injection of therapies and blood infusion therapies. We don't need to do any of that. But it's moving to that next level of understanding science and understanding how the body actually, anatomically, physiologically, immunologically, if you can understand how to balance that, you can do this naturally. Functional medicine is a big thing that's been popular. I've been doing this for about 20 years now when I got certified. And now it's a big trendy thing, which is good and bad, because what happens is there's a lot of functional medicine practitioners who are not physicians. So people can get a functional medicine thing. They do a lot of testing, and it's great. I love testing. I'm an evidence-based guy, so I like to test nutrients and microbiome and genetic pathways and methylation pathways and all these other things. But it comes with the practice of experience of how to interpret the labs, not just say this is low and here's a product. And that seems what, unfortunately, a functional medicine has become. The other thing is functional medicine has become as a testing parameter, where a lot of people just do it for the testing and they make money on this thing. We're a nonprofit. House of Sanjevani is a nonprofit. So what we do is that we don't charge extra for the testing. It's whatever the test costs, whatever the patient's insurance is, or whatever the cash basis is for the testing. We don't get involved in that, because there's also a misguidance. If you start testing and start making so much money on testing, then you're just doing testing for no reason. And that's why I see a lot of people coming in. They've done tens of thousands of dollars of testing, and they're still not better. It's because they didn't get the right guidance of how to interpret those tests, and they just didn't. And then lifestyle medicine. So lifestyle medicine is really popular. Interesting thing, Sanjevani Integrative Medicine Health and Lifestyle Center. That's the name of our company for 22 years now. And when I first put that on the building, a lot of people made fun of it. They said, why having lifestyle in there? And actually, I got a little slack for that. And I was kind of like, what's wrong with you guys? It's all about lifestyle. You're changing your life. It's not a diet. It's a lifestyle. And is integrative medicine. Then later on, Jeffrey Bland kind of started coining this term lifestyle medicine. And now there's a American Board of Lifestyle Medicine, which is great. I love it. It's a great thing to have, talking about plant-based diets and sleep and the exercise and relationships and all these wonderful things. But there's a lack of lifestyle medicine that I find. And with the lack of lifestyle medicine is the following. And it's not to be critical, but when we're talking about understanding plant nutrition and food is medicine, then we should, I wrote down here, docs need to go farther so you can go further. What that means is that I always hear people now who are kind of moving plant-based physicians, which is fantastic, by the way. I mean, everybody needs to be plant-based. There's no argument on that in the data or otherwise clinically. But they do that. And someone says, oh, I have a headache. They said, take an ibuprofen. Or I got blood pressure. Okay, take your lisinopril. Oh, I got blood sugar. Take your metformin. I'm like, but there's wonderful plant medicines that are derived from foods that actually can do the same thing that will help reduce it with less side effects. And hopefully over time, which we do, is work with improving more of the lifestyle factors and dietary factors and environmental factors. And then we're able to wean off successfully. But it's kind of always like this dichotomy I see that all these people are talking about plant medicine, plant foods, but then they don't have the training in herbal medicine, which we get in integrative. And also, if you look at my bio, we've done a lot of extensive studies. I still study. I mean, I've been researching and I'm constantly in training because there's always new forms of medicine that we should be learning and adding to our patient approval. And integrative medicine is a combination of all of these things. So the goal is like, if I need to get a scan, if I need to look at a blood test, if I need to write a prescription, I can. I have the liberty and I have the privilege, actually, which is a privilege, actually, to write those things. But the problem is when people are sometimes now so what I call specialized in certain areas that they're missing the encompassing of how to directionally kind of focus the patient in the right way. And so sometimes they can be led off track. Like it's not that it's functional is bad or lifestyle is bad or holistic or naturopathic is bad or regenerative is bad. Just that sometimes it's not the full piece because like, oh, I got this, but then these people don't know how to talk about diet, or these people, okay, they don't know which herbs to give, or these people don't know which, and so there's a lack of that. And integrative medicine nicely is integrating all of these things. And you want to find a practitioner, we do online Zoom telehealth consultations and also in person. So we're welcome to do that for any of your clients out there. And, so I just want to end up, recommending, whole food, plant-based, eat as much fruits, vegetables, grains, legumes, as I mentioned before. Kind of test for food sensitivities, find a practitioner or we can help you with that because you want to find out, I want to be on a complete anti-inflammatory diet. If you got gut problems, if you have gas, bloating, diarrhea, constipation, any of those issues, then definitely you want to have your microbiome checked. We can check for all sorts of dysbiosis and things like that. Nutritional deficiencies, we don't give supplementation. We're going to tell you what foods you should be eating. And if it's a deficiency or you have a certain condition that's a disease that we need to bring it up, then we can help you with targeted, safe, natural, effective therapies. Avoid ibuprofen, Motrin, Advil, naproxen, and Aleve. That's going to be in my book, What a Black Box Warning Is. And so just avoid those things. And we do have natural anti-inflammatories. If we have some time, we can talk about that and other things like glucan and vitamin D to help strengthen your immune system. Practice some kind of exercise, meditation, stress reduction, yoga, and we'll focus on community and also service. And those are kind of my just general recommendations for today on how you can help reduce inflammation. And here's my contact information. You can go to our website. You can sign up for our newsletter, or you can just look at who we are, what we have to offer. We can also do a telemedicine consultation. Boss America is one of our anti-inflammatory products. You can read about that. You can also search on the internet, read about that as well. You can see our store, and also you can get our book, An Inflammation Nation. I think that is it for our presentation. So I will now stop sharing the screen. Thank you all for listening, and I look forward to your questions and a fruitful discussion.
Okay, so Dr. Pai, you get 2 awards today, not only for best screen, but for fastest talker. I always thought that Dr. Joel Furman was the fastest talker, but you are, but yet I was able to follow. You know how on YouTube, if you watch a video, you can change the settings and make it like 1.25, 1.5. Right. We need one for you to make it a little bit slower. But yeah, the information.
I'm always a little fast because I want to spend a little bit more time. People can go back and listen to it, watch it again, and also it's good because they can read the book at their pace. They also can, when they listen to it, 14 hours, professionally read. It's not by me, so it's read, at a slower pace. But it's because I don't, people don't have to get everything all at one time. The goal is even when I have my 10 steps in my book, epigenetics, right? Diet, lifestyle, environment, belief system. It is doing a little bit of all these steps and then going back to one and doing them a little bit all. We're not perfectionists. I'm a realist, but realistically, you need to be doing better today than you were yesterday. Right. And so we always want to help our patients. We go shopping with them. We do cooking classes. I mean, it's about keeping the key motivating factors. And sometimes it's economical. Like when people feel like, gosh, I spent all this money and haven't gotten better. Or why is this? It's understanding. Everybody has their aha moments. And once we find it, then the likelihood and the ability to change is there.
Wow. I'll never look at butter the same now. I'm going to look at it and think of birth control.
Yeah. We always knew that it had a certain amount, but we never really, so we'd always say, yeah, it has a certain amount of estrogens, but the oncologist was able to show the study. They actually were able to calculate that. And I was surprised too, because that is a huge, and that's in addition to all the xenoestrogens, the plastic estrogens, all these other chemicals that we get, and even the bioidentical hormones that people are still taking on top of that as well.
Wow. That thing about the airline, that is so interesting to me, if that will happen and how that will be, because won't people complain like that their civil liberties are being encroached?
Yeah. So here's the interesting thing, which is not a good thing, because, America's not on its honor system right now. Because, honor system. But they're actually coming up with some kind of discussion of what they're going to ask, like a general weight question. Are you above, below X amount? And if they doubt that, or if you kind of fib that, then they might actually have a scale that you will have to stand on, I'll do it. And because I always thought it was unfair. I mean, some people are going to be big. There's always going to be, we call big bone people. But when now we're talking about like when people are morbidly obese, that's not just natural. Okay. Being 100%, 100 pounds or more over your body baseline is not normal. And I always thought it was not fair, because every time I go on a plane, and sometimes I'd have like, a few pounds extra, and I'd have to put in my backpack or something. Then I look back behind the person who's like 400 pounds, and I'm like, well, that's not fair, because that's the total weight of the plane. But it is something, Americans, we all kind of gained weight. So it's not just like, oh, you're plant-based. Everybody pretty much gained weight in America over COVID. So it is an overall health problem. And, I don't know how they're going to address it, because I have a feeling there's going to be a lot more fighting in videos at the airport coming soon.
It's very interesting. Elizabeth says, so the real pandemic is obesity, diet, and lifestyle, even more than COVID.
Well, I mean, never underestimate the power of COVID, because the Delta is coming soon, and it's still going to rage, especially in patients in places that are unvaccinated. But when we see those places on the map, those are the places that actually also have the highest comorbidities. So that's a double whammy. Like if you're living in Mississippi, Alabama, you're living in Texas, you're living in Florida, you're living, those states right now, and Alabama, I mean, just it's a risk. And so that is something that there is a study. I'll give you an example. There was a couple of studies showing that plant-based people who get exposed have the least amount of symptoms. But that doesn't mean that a plant-based person should not also get vaccinated. So there's also people who are like, well, I'm so healthy because I eat greens all day and do my yoga. I'm like, no, the virus doesn't really care your politics or your exercise or your diet. It's just that you're trying to always lower your comorbid risk factors. Our practice is always about risk reduction and improving outcomes. And that's all it's about. It's not being about perfect, but it's always about, it's kind of like when people buy a car, you always want to make sure that the brakes are good. You want to have airbags, you want to have side airbags, you want to have, all the safety things. And so the more you have that, eventually you may get into a car accident, but you're going to be more easily to walk out of that and walk away from that accident.
You are just a wealth of information. People are saying you're like a talking encyclopedia.
I've been told I'm the integrative medicine Wikipedia.
Yeah, you're that's amazing.
Sometimes I get the dates a little bit right now, because I round up, because I don't like to keep the numbers right exact, but yeah. That's what you get.
You know what I'm thinking? Instead of like maybe penalizing people for having excess weight, what if we just reward people that like just give me a discount? In other words,
sure,
maybe that would be more fair and acceptable.
That would be great. Like, gave you a cheaper, because it's just like when you have to pay for an extra bag, right? So maybe you should get, like something discount, or maybe better snacks or something. I don't know.
Well, it's funny, because a while back, PCRM had a very, and I think it was meant to be fun, a commercial about how people were paying extra to sit next to a vegan because they were slimmer. And a lot of people took offense to that ad. And again, we don't want to shame or blame people for being.
No, we're not shaming anybody. But what is shameful is that America is not what it used to be. So we can't just, and sometimes it becomes an argument, and I think it's a false argument, because we're saying, oh, it's fat shaming. It's not fat shaming. I think we have to come to a realization of looking ourselves in the mirror and saying, we are not the same people that we were 30 years ago. I mean, when I grew up in Las Cruces, which is near El Paso, Texas, okay? And so we're talking, I'm in a 50th poorest state. So, but even at that time, and even now, when I go to a store, people are different. People are not as healthy. The average person I see is taking anywhere between 8 and 12 pharmaceutical drugs. The average VA patient is taking 26 pharmaceutical drugs. So something's wrong with, and then that's just the drugs. That's not talking about the 8 to 20 supplements that'll come in from the chiropractor, the naturopath, the functional doc, the holistic doc, my acupuncturist, my massage therapist, my MLM friend who's telling me like they're coming, but they're still not healthy. So it's not working because they haven't changed their epigenetics, diet, lifestyle, environment, belief system.
Yeah. I love what you said about alcohol because it's just so much being touted by so many people as this health food, and it's not.
It's not. And it's hard because, even in this last 2 conferences I saw, they were just showing like more and more data, which is, so it used to be like, kind of like, we just didn't agree with it, or we'd said, okay, eat less of it. Now the data is like, it causes all these problems. And, the average person is consuming, 1 or 2 glasses of wine at dinner, 1 or 2 beers, a cocktail. And, and to me, I'm like, it's not that, okay, if you celebrate on the 4th of July or birthday, that's the end of the world. However, everybody's celebrating every day, on some level, every day is game day, every day is someday, right? So that's where I think the pandemic, we kind of slipped because some people were allowed to do certain things like that. People kind of indulged a little bit more than they would normally.
That's interesting. So as Cindy says, well, how, these questions could have been typed before you reached that point in your presentation, but Cindy said, well, what about grass-fed beef, organic chicken, and how can organic grass-fed dairy have hormones?
It does. Because how do they keep the cow pregnant? They do. Cows kept pregnant basically for the first 7 years of its life continuously, and then it goes to ground beef. Same thing with the chickens. People don't realize, like we get rid of certain chickens, like the male chickens, they just go into feed. And then the rest is like, because we use them because they grow. But all these things are given hormones. And in fact, the hormones are made to actually grow, even when they're saying organic. Also antibiotics. One thing is interesting, like some of the fast food chains would say, like, we don't use antibiotics in our chicken. I won't name the couple of chains, but how they get away with this because they're not giving human antibiotics. But if you give veterinarian antibiotics, it's not counted because it's a different classification under, FDA does this, and then vets is like a little bit different. So it's an animal world. So there's a lot of things, my book will cover that. But at the end of the day, even with organic, you have to say, does it have phytonutrients? No. Does it have antioxidants? It has very little. Does it have fiber? No. And is it pro-inflammatory? Yes. So like grass-fed, or wild caught and free range is not going to get you further than what you think. And that's just the industry trying to sell us to continue to eat it, right? Like, and I was sold it more than anybody. Like, I was the person that I went out of my way to spend a little bit more thinking that, that was my get out of jail card of disease. And it's not.
Yeah. Sounds like you'd be a great whistleblower because it blew my mind what you told me before we logged on about the vaping incident. Yeah. Maybe talk about that because that
yeah, in my book, I mentioned vaping because that was a couple of years ago, but now the numbers have exploded. There's a couple of companies, the big vaping companies that were under lawsuit with the federal government for advertising and getting teens in. There's documentaries actually on Netflix or whatever. I think it's called Rotten or something, or Dirty Money, one of those ones. And they talked about the vaping industry and the tobacco industry and how they got it, into the schools, getting, generations of these kids, millennials and younger, addicted. But now there's a study that just came out just 2 weeks ago. You'll probably see in the press that one of the Juul, which is one of the largest vaping companies that's kind of been contributing to this epidemic of vaping, they were caught as they bought a medical journal. So they actually paid for a medical journal in full, in cash. And they actually put like 11 studies which were funded by them with their consultants saying, it's okay, maybe it's partial, maybe the data's not this. So that physicians and people, in the industry would then quote back and say, well, the data shows in the study. So we have to understand that, like, right now, there is a lot of misinformation sometimes in science. And that's why we have to look at multiple studies, multiple publications. We have to also look at, who funded it. Is there conflict of interest? These are things that we have to not just follow the headline. A lot of times you'll see a headline and, that could be just as much of an advertorial than anything else.
Wow. So here's a question from Fondo. How do you feel about colonic irrigation?
I don't. It's not good for you. So colonics, people used to think like I'm flushing things out. Now we understand that, and now that we can test it because we do it the microbiome testing in our office, it actually makes the microbiome more dysfunctional. Because remember, you cannot replenish all these things in your GI tract. We can eat more foods to get more diversity of probiotics, but you just can't take probiotics. Like when we give a probiotic, I'll give you an example, right? So we give 100 billion of 12 species, right? Which is great, and it's acid stable, passes the stomach, blah, blah, blah. Here's the species, here's the clinical dose, fine. But you have over 1,000 species in your gut, and you have 100 trillion. That weighs about 4 pounds. So and what I'm giving is 100 billion of 12 species. What people take at the store or with the GI doctor is one species of maybe 10 billion or even 10 million, sometimes only 1 million. It's really inconsequential. So every time someone's doing a colonic, what we're understanding is that water actually dries out the colon, and it actually makes the person a little bit more constipated. Then people become colonic junkies. And so we have people all the time like, oh, I got to get my colonic. I get my colonic. And we have in cases where people who are colonics end up having colon cancer, even being plant-based, because the colonics causes injury and damage to microbiome, and 80% of your immune system is in your microbiome. So
Wow.
I don't recommend it.
Thank you. So here's a question from a live viewer named Donna saying, what about the vaping you buy from medical marijuana clinics? And a question came in advance from Susan. Does medical cannabis have a role in any kind of wellness strategy?
Yes, actually it does. And in fact, I've written extensively, and you'll probably see me on YouTube videos and everything. If you go to our website under the media section, there's a lot of videos. I've been writing about and studying the endocannabinoid system for about 8 years now extensively. And I teach doctors about the endocannabinoid system and use of it on especially neurological and inflammatory conditions. So yes, the use of the cannabinoids and and then more importantly, the terpenes are very important from cannabis medicine. Not necessarily THC. THC is only helpful for those people who have nausea, they have pain, they have really bad insomnia. It can be very helpful for that. But really, it's we use a lot more hemp oil because I don't need to have the THC unless the patient has cancer, pain, or nausea from treatment. Then we give them the medical cannabis card. But there's a whole falseness of the industry of understanding, like, is there a certificate of analysis that can be presented on your product? So we have to look at because remember, there's no state or federal regulation now on pesticides, herbicides, chemicals, mycotoxins, solvents in these products. So although, yay, we have legislation, our state just approved it just last month or the beginning of this month, so yay, but the problem is it's a wild west. It's like kind of like we've opened it up and there's not even regulation saying you should wash your hands before you touch like edibles and make edibles in the kitchen. So we haven't even got to that state because most states are looking at tax revenue. That's how everybody's interested in, but they're not looking at the safety. Like if you have a taco truck, they have to teach them. There's a little sign like wash your hands before using the rest. There's nothing in the cannabis industry that's there. Now there's people who follow good practices, but in general, it's not. It's kind of a wild west. So we always look at like using I use a company that I'm part of, medical director. They use organic hemp farms. They were the first USDA organically certified hemp farm in Colorado. So we've been doing it for a very, very long time. Now on the vaping aspect, the problem with the vaping is this: I prefer actually using sublingual tinctures. I know that vaping can get faster when people have pain. So if they're like, oh, I need a smoke, I get a vape. The problem is the carriers that they're using for the vaping has some of this PEG, they call it PEG. Some of the data now is showing that that's the one that's remember, we have to take like an oil and then vaporize the oil. So there's a carrier like this chemical. Some people use like a vegetable glycerin, and that could be safer. But the thing that's used in most industries is PEG, and that has been showing there's data that actually contributes to, especially people who are chronically vaping, causes for more inflammation and lung dysfunction of the cilia function. So again, a lot of people will have good cannabis or good hemp product, but then the carrier is just generic, whatever they get from, actually comes from China in these barrels because it's cheap, and that's the constituent that everybody kind of uses. So I kind of look at using more sublingual tinctures or edibles.
Great, thank you. Sarita says, how do you feel about cold pressed cooking oils and cooking? I don't use any oil, like zero, and I haven't.
Yeah. So we should be cutting down on the amount of oil. I'm not a zero oil person because, from my perspective, because I see a lot of cancer patients as well. And so when they get underweight, one of the ways I can kind of cheat to get their high caloric density is by adding more fats, right? Having like more avocados and nut butters and stuff just for that. But that's a medical problem where like they're underweight because of chemotherapy, nausea, vomiting, etc. But in general, everybody's using way too much oil. And the oil having such a high caloric density, a lot of people come to my office like, oh, I'm eating Mediterranean diet and I can't lose oil. I can't lose weight. And they're basically pouring olive oil and everything. And, 210 calories in a tablespoon of oil. And, when you go to the restaurant, you're dipping and you have more oil. Like you've already had 1,000 calories before you had the pasta and everything else. And so people can't lose weight. So it's a highly refined product. So even though it's plant-based, it doesn't have the fiber, doesn't have the protein, doesn't have the other aspects that we that we need. So eating less oil is always better. I try to like bake as much. I waterless cook now as much as I can. I spray now a little bit, just on the pan. But instead of before, like people used to pour it, I try to avoid that. If you can kind of get to use the spraying and getting better pans, actually, then you won't have to worry about that as well.
It's very, God, since I can't even remember the last time I cooked with it. And it's so much easier to clean up
Yeah.
and skin looks better and you save money. So
And we're just got in this habit, because that was an industry that's selling oil. Olive oil industry is a huge industry, and most olive oil is not real olive oil. When you look at all the research, it's corn oil with, there's like Italian mafia that's controlling this whole 60 minutes on those things now, a couple of them, So we have to be careful of it. All these oils are now being adulterated as well. So less oil, the better. Also, just remember not to cook in olive oil. A lot of people, that's a big mistake, is they cook in olive oil. Olive oil is a low temperature oil. It will smoke, it gets oxidized, it becomes rancid. So a lot of people are like, oh, I cook my fish in olive oil. I fry in olive oil. It's like, no, there's grapeseed, there's avocado, there's other oils, obviously less, if you bake it and use air frying, and all the other things are a lot better. But that's a one mistake that I hear that most patients will come in. It's like, oh, I just use this olive oil and I put it on high heat and I fry things. I'm like, then the oil has turned rancid. You become a pro-oxidant. Now you're pro-inflammation.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a natural food. There's no oil in nature. Our ancestors didn't eat it for most of human history. So it seems like not really. If people need to gain weight, let them eat peanut butter. At least that tastes good. Oil.
No, I get. Yeah, I mean, so anyways, but oil is, remember, everything has an industry, right? And so you have to understand there's an olive oil industry, and even that's plants, right? There's I give you an example. Like I was at a conference a few years ago, about 5 years ago, and I actually ended up being escorted out of the conference. It's a nutrition conference, and but it was sponsored by one of the universities that I went to train to it, blah blah. And they were showing a slide, and they're talking about diets and disease function. And this is in the Adventist studies that they always use. And they were showing, like here's like people who eat standard American diet, and then if you eat some chicken, and they always stop at this kind of Mediterranean diet. And they cut the slide, and it goes further. It goes vegetarian and vegan. If you go to completely plant-based, then it has the lowest diseases of any diet. And they cut the slide, and so I raised my hand and I said, hey, there's two other aspects of the slide that is no longer present in because they were talking about Mediterranean diet, and the conference was sponsored by a seafood company, and the Wi-Fi password was salmon, and they had salmon 3 times a day at the conference. And so it was, it's not a product, but it's a food product. And so they're able to kind of still influence doctors, because who doesn't want to eat a fatty fish, but that's still high saturated fat. It's a high 40% fat calories. So if people eat salmon 3 times a week, you ain't gonna lose weight. You still gonna have high cholesterol. Still has no fiber. Still has fun. Like all the things that we've talked about before. So it's just another way that people are shifting, because they think like, oh, there's omega-3s, it must be healthy, but that's not the end reason why we should be eating. And now the studies came out last year showing the amount of microplastic. If you eat fish regularly, you're getting like 13,000 pieces of microplastic in your body.
That's crazy. Wow.
Which is, and they were saying that's like, and I don't know exact. So again, this is like the Wikipedia me. Like I remember something, but I don't remember all of it. It was like so many amounts of like credit cards, you know what I'm saying, of plastic that you're consuming, because the fish particle microplastics in the ocean are just coming. So the wild caught is not free of toxins. Everybody's trying to find a cleaner way to justify them eating it. I did them as much myself for the longest period of time, but you have to understand, like, and for the environment, for the animals, for the people who are working in those unfortunate industries that we exploit, you got to be looking at it, like the movie Seaspiracy that you mentioned before, Cowspiracy, Seaspiracy, Game Changers, Forks Over Knives, What the Health. These are things that people should be looking at for a reason.
So Cindy says, but is taking fish oil bad? I mean, you don't need to have anything from an animal, guys.
No, and in fact, if you read my book, I did help, and I was talking to Chef AJ earlier, as like, I write about omega-3s in my book, right? And and at that time, it's a couple of years ago, and I wrote about, like, how I helped formulate one of the first vegan plant oils in the market. It's actually a company in Canada, and they actually made an EPA and DHA. Most DHA products now come from algal oil, but they weren't able to extract the EPA part. You need EPA for the anti-inflammatory cholesterol, that kind of aspect, and the DHA is for your brain function, cognitive function, right? So you need to have both. And when I wrote my book, I published it and say, hey, this is a great vegan product. We kind of came out with this thing. I helped the team over there. That company got bought out by a super conglomerate. They own 8 other fish oil companies, and they blocked the importation to the United States for the plant oil for 6 years. Until now, the sustainability is no longer there. So they had to get into the market. But the thing is this, remember I showed that there was high omega-6 in the diet. And so everybody was pushing this high, like, let's have fish oil or, oils. But really, if you lower your omega-3s and you just eat flax, chia, hemp, walnuts, you get plenty of that, not only the oil, the omega-3 fatty acids, you get the protein and the fiber and the phytonutrients. So what we do in our office, believe it or not, is that we test people. We test everybody. We test everybody because that's what we do. I'm evidence-based. So when we do the nutrition testing, I can actually test their fatty acids. And then we can say, just eat more of these foods, and we can come back in 3 months or 6 months and retest it. And you can see how all those nutrients change, but not just only the fatty acid ratio. You look at their inflammation markers, they'll go down. You'll look at, all the nutrient levels go up if you're eating a plant-based diet. So we actually definitively look at every person, so we can look at microbiome, individuality. It's not just take these things. Everything has to be specifically targeted for a reason. And food is medicine. And then we use plant medicines in lieu of conventional medicines to look at, something that's safe, natural, effective, and gives you less side effects.
We say use plant medicines in lieu of conventional medicines, but conventional medicines were based on plants.
70 to 75% of all pharmaceutical drugs today are originally derived from plants. The only reason is that, that we can make it into a synthetic and make it in a factory, which is easier than, chopping down the plant. But we have to understand that, even chemotherapy is like, Taxol comes from the Pacific yew tree. I mean, these are things that we all use, so, and plants also can be toxic. So like there's, there's poisons and of everything. And so we have to be careful, but that's where someone like me, when we come in with the expertise of herbal medicine, I'll give you an example. This is something that people are always understanding, is that when someone has a cancer, for example, they go to a naturopath or a holistic doctor, they might say, take everything. And the oncologist will say, don't take anything. There's interactions. But that's not right. Both of them are wrong. Like, we have to look at each drug. We have to look at how it's metabolized. We have to look at the pharmacology. And the problem is, a lot of the naturopaths don't have that pharmacology experience. And a lot of the doctors don't have the naturopathic experience of understanding what the herb is, for example. But we're able to blend that. So we can look at what is synergistic, and then also what's contraindicative of what we shouldn't be giving. And we're always about improving outcomes. It's not saying this is bad. I mean, there's certain drugs we are so happy that we have that we wouldn't be here without. However, we might overuse them, and they should only be for short term to get the body kind of in a state of health or a state of control. And then the rest, dietary, lifestyle, and environmental changes and epigenetics should take effect. And then we don't need to have those prescription drugs anymore.
Right. Well, Belinda says, what about eggs? Even if eggs were good for you, why would anyone eat the menstrual cycle of an animal? That's just so disgusting to me.
I never thought of it that way, but so here's the first thing I'll say. Yeah, you don't need eggs. Eggs, the surprising thing, aside of the cholesterol, aside of it being one of the most pro-inflammatory allergic foods when it's tested, is that the choline from the eggs is the one that creates what they call TMAO. So you can just Google TMAO and look at, if you go to nutritionfacts.org and just type in eggs, just nutritionfacts.org, type in eggs, and Dr. Grieger will probably go over all the videos and research. But TMAO is a procarcinogen promoter that is produced by the microbiome via the liver after it's consumed, and eggs have the highest amount of that ingredient to be converted. So it is something that we should be avoiding, even if it's organic, even if it's free range eggs. So these are things that we hold on. Now there is a vegan egg. Okay, just letting you know, there's like Just Egg and all. It does have oil. Okay, it's not a super healthy food, but it doesn't have the cholesterol. And if people still want, I'm okay. Believe it or not, Chef, I use a lot of transition foods in our practice because I'm trying to transition people. Remember 50th poor state bucket of chicken. How do we get people to eat healthier? So if I have to use a seitan, if I have to use a tempeh, if I have to use something that's a mock meat. Remember, some of these soy-based meats, believe it or not, are 1,000 years old. So a lot of people think like it's just recently made up because of the vegan movement or plant-based movement. No, if you go into Asia, like they've been eating this for literally 1,000 years. So just letting you know that's super healthy. And do I have someone have maybe a Beyond Meat versus a regular one? Yes. But they shouldn't be eating it that often. So I have a patient just the other day. He was eating that 4 or 5 times a week, and his lipids are up. And he's not eating any other any other animal protein. But he's like, I like my hamburgers and stuff like that. And I'm like, it's super saturated fat because of the coconut oil in there, right? So we have to be careful. But I do help to use transition foods because I want people, as they learn their skill of cooking and as we help them along with it, to feel a little bit comfortable. But once you get comfortable with that, you don't need to have any of these things.
Thank you. Judy says, I've been vegan for 6 months and they just found a polyp. But isn't today's polyp grown like 10 years ago?
Yeah. So it takes about 10 to 15 years to develop those things. In fact, almost all polyps and even cancers are usually about 10 to 15 years in the making. So even when they do, say, a mammogram and we see a little speck, we see a little tiny area, that took 10 to 15 years. So if someone missed their mammogram one, like also COVID came and they missed it, and then they go, oh my God, I got diagnosed last year. It was because I missed it during COVID. No, you wouldn't have necessarily seen it that time. So the problem is none of those things are prevention. We do want to do colonoscopies because once they remove that polyp. So here's the question, or the answer I would give for that patient, person who just mentioned that question, was that if we remove that polyp, which they will do, and she goes on a plant-based diet, the likelihood of that polyps coming back is super low. So one of the best things I motivate patients is like, if you don't like colonoscopies, if you go now, you still got to get screened to be negative. But once you're negative, if you continue to eat plant-based, you test your food sensitivities because you can still be allergic to foods that cause inflammation, and you're having normal bowel function, not constipated, for example, or having other gut dysbiosis issues. Or itis issues, then your likelihood of having to have any kind of pathology in the colon is low.
Great, thank you. Elaine says she's been vegan for 20 years, but still has arthritis in her neck.
Right. So that means that there's something that she's still eating that's still causing inflammation. Now, she can have still trauma. People can have damage, right? We're not, vegans are not like, we don't play football or skateboard or, get in car accidents. So we do have trauma. The thing is that something that she's still eating that's contributing to that degeneration or that inflammation. So we have to look at, so we would investigate of the plant-based diet that she's eating, then, we actually have a plant panel too. So we look at like, here's more beans, little vegetables, legumes, and we'll find the foods that are immediate or delayed that are coming in that are triggering her itis. We want to, individualize it. So remember, 80 to 82% of all diseases reversed and improved by a plant-based diet, but it's not 100%. Why? Because your body reserves the right to say, I don't like this, or any of these other things behind me.
It seems like almost anything can cause inflammation, and even healthy things in excess can cause inflammation.
Sure. Absolutely. And, and we like to look at specifics because, if people have a plant, remember, because, when people have food sensitivities, plants are going to be half of the problem sometimes. So if someone's coming back to say, blueberries, and they're like, oh, we're saying, but blueberries is good for your memory and all the anthocyanins and the antioxidants, and they're putting blueberries in their smoothie every day, that could be causing more problems. And so we just say, switch to a different berry. I mean, the idea is not saying never eat those things. And then also we're able to train people how to eat, and rotate them back into the diet so that they don't have to always avoid it. There's also ways to get your body to be more immunotolerant or stronger against the initial triggers.
Right. Faith wants to know how you feel about CBD or CBD oil for anxiety or sleep.
I like it. We use it a lot. We, again, organic, and we even designed a calming tincture that we actually put in then the other herbs that have similar terpenes that have a balancing effect. So that, we put like lemon balm and California poppy and lavender and other things like that, just to help with that and skullcap and some of these other things to help balance that aspect. But we're looking at terpenes in the cannabinoid profile. And so there's certain terpenes that actually have more of a sedative effect and other anti-inflammatory effects, some of them more for GI effects and all. So we're very specific that when we look at the use of those things. But yes, it's better than taking sleeping pills or any kind of prescription medication for sure.
Right. Thank you. So Gina wants to know, do you see people online? I know you do in person, but maybe a little bit talk about what your practice is like and how people can connect.
Yeah, so we do see people online. In fact, majority of my patients now I was doing Zoom consultations like 2 years, 3 years, 4 years before COVID. And so then it became a full-time thing. But I have patients from all over the United States, all over the world now, because now everybody has Zoom. And we do the consultation. We send a video. They watch a video, 3-hour educational video, so that gets them prepped. Because the more they come, they don't have to understand everything, but the more they come prepped with questions, and this is what I need to do or what not need to do, we can send the testing kits to, especially in the United States, to where they're at. If they're out of the country, then we also can help. There's other companies that will say, use this one, or that test is very similar, and we can get data and try to get it covered by whoever, or their insurance or their government or whatever their healthcare plan has. And then we do the consultations, we do the follow-ups, and that's what we do. So, and we are able to provide, we have a store. So when people look at products like, what can I take for blood pressure? What do I take for, our anti-inflammatories? What I'm really known for is Bosmeric, which is our natural anti-inflammatory. It's patented, it's clinically tested. And so it's something that you can take within 20 minutes, lowers inflammation, and it lasts over 8 hours. And so when we give the patented ingredients, the right form of curcumin, the right form of Boswellia frankincense, the right form of ginger, the right form of black pepper, manufactured correctly, then we can actually have the outcome. So I don't have to give an ibuprofen. I don't have to, a lot of people who don't want to take CBD or cannabis product when they have pain, the thing is we want to give anti-inflammatories, not pain medications. Pain medications disconnect the brain from the pain, which is helpful for, say, post-surgery or post-accident, but it doesn't heal from the inflammation from the trauma or damage. And so we always have to look at, now when people take the Bosmeric, for example, which they always do, and they rave about it and everybody loves it. It's on Amazon, it's at our office, and you can get it at bosmeric.com, for example, or sanjevnistore.com and look it up. But the thing is, if people take it and they go, oh my God, I feel so much better, then that means they have a lot more inflammation than they know. And if people take and say it doesn't help me at all, then that tells me they have even more inflammation than they actually even know. So it's one of those things but we always want to avoid the non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. And I cover that in a huge section in my book, looking at black box warnings and how that can be dangerous. Taking ibuprofen, Motrin, or Advil every day or every once in a while can still contribute to heart attack, stroke, and GI bleed.
I'm so lucky that I was born allergic to aspirin and all NSAIDs, so I've never had to take
that. Which is good. You'll see in my book, outside of heart disease and the common disease I said, it's one of the largest contributing factors of death in the United States is the medical errors and side effects of drugs. And other side effects of drugs, the NSAID class is the largest one. Heart attack, strokes, and GI bleeds is more common. So you can take one ibuprofen once a month during your menstrual cramps or migraine headache and have a GI bleed or stroke or a stomach perforation and be completely vegan and have no cholesterol problems and still have a heart attack or stroke. So it's one of those things. My book will go into the detail of why we want to use now natural plant medicines. And that's why, my specialty in integrative medicine. So we're not just like, oh yeah, eat plant-based, but then take this pill. I'm like, why don't we take a plant pill that has less side effects? And as long as we have clinical doses, as long as we have evidence-based studies to show how to give it and how to deliver it, which is what we do, then really that's where, lifestyle is important, but we need to start encompassing everything about this plants behind me. Plants is food, plants is also medicine. And we have to understand how to use that correctly rather than just saying, eat a plant-based diet, exercise, stress reduction, and sleep well, all the stuff. But then here's your drug for your blood pressure. Here's a drug for your diabetes. To me, it's a little bit of a disconnect. I think we need to go, doctors again, need to go further so you can go farther.
Wow. So Gina says, can you live in California? Does it matter where you live? You can still do an appointment with you anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway.
Nice. And Catherine says, do you have any openings for doctors at your clinic?
I'm always interested in talking. I guess we need more help always. But the hard thing of being fully integrative as I am, it's hard to find people who understand what I do. That's been my biggest challenge. And it's because, since I've trained in all of these things and I continue to train, remember, learning is this lifelong thing. A lot of people just did one section and then they kind of fall back. So it's like conventional with some functional testing or conventional with some acupuncture or conventional with this. And we want to be looking at this whole integrative perspective. But yeah, they can always contact me if they want to. We also, believe it or not, we have tons of medical students and residents who come and do their rotations when they have their electives to look at, what is integrative medicine. It's a great way to, as we give back, I'm one of the assistant professors here at the university here and in family and community medicine. So, we always want to teach, young doctors coming into the field, like this is how you should be, like diet should be the first thing. You hit the diet first, your life is going to be easy. If you don't hit the diet first, then you're just going to be a pill prescriber.
Great. I know that NSAIDs are not favorable. What about steroids? Not for chronic use, but just once in a while when you have like a severe injury. Do you think that's bad? Like somebody took a few once a year?
I don't give it without a reason, or I wouldn't recommend it without a reason. We know that, so for example, like if it's for like respiratory right now, like say COVID, someone has an asthmatic attack, someone has, some kind of injury post-surgery or something that they give it for that short acute inflammatory response, fine. But if someone's taking it like, they give me these pills and I just kind of take it when I flare every once in a while, then that tells me that they're not keeping their inflammation under control. They didn't have to work up because when we give the steroids, and thankfully we have it, by the way, we're not saying anything bad about the steroids. In fact, out of all the COVID drugs that they gave, steroids is one of probably the best ones out of all of them because it's reducing the inflammation regardless of what the cause is. But we have to look at, it's also an immunosuppressive agent. It does cause glucose intolerance. So when people take these things chronically, so when people have like rheumatoid arthritis and they're taking low dose steroids for long periods of time, then they start having secondary, tertiary problems because of it's now causing imbalance. So again, some is good, but you want to always ask the question, why am I taking this? Even though it might be helpful, and thank God we have it, right? But we have to look at why I keep taking it. What is the inflammatory triggers that cause me to cross this, we call it levy point, that then triggers my symptoms to happen.
Great, thanks. So A2 milk. This Cindy just keeps asking about every kind of animal product, hoping that you're going to change your answer on one of them.
No, and in fact, that will be in a different discussion. We're actually going to be having a radio program similar like this, where we'll be like inviting doctors. But there's a whole section now. There's whole research studies, 2 of them that were done really well by this conference I had, talking about that there's no difference in the that's a big marketing ploy of A2. So no. It's not healthier. It's not better.
It's like vaping. A2 milk is like the vaping.
Yeah, it's another way of but even then, it's not even as even that argument of A2 is not there. Like that's more marketing than anything else. But when they actually analyze the milk contents and looking at the protein structures, everything is that's not different.
So a lot of people watching Weil are saying they have migraines and they've been taking medicine for a long time. Can you help them if they come and have a consult with you, get off
Absolutely.
those?
Absolutely. Because you have to look at why you're having a migraine. I'm glad we have migraine medicines, right? So remember, I'm not anti-pharma. Like we're anti-side effect. We're pro-patient, pro-safety, pro-data. That's what I talk about all the time. So thankfully they have it. Otherwise they'd be debilitated with it. But when people come to me like, how long have you been having migraines? 20 years, 30 years, sometimes before you were born, Dr. Pai. It's like, wow. And you still have these problems? Why hasn't it been solved? Like when people say I have heart disease, diabetes for 20 years, 30 years, like, why hasn't it been reversed? Like there's no reason for you to still be having this.
It's hilarious. Like people say, you got to go to my psychiatrist. He's great. I've been seeing him for 30 years. And I'm like, really? Like if he's that great, why are you seeing him?
Exactly. I got my chiropractor for my back pain. How long ago? 7 years. Like how many times? Twice a month, 3 times a week, whatever. Like, well, that's not healing the body. It's kind of, and because remember, everybody has an industry. I have a model which is interesting because our goal is to move people from this disease away, right? And an interesting thing is once they get their diabetes under control and they reverse it. Once they get their heart disease, reverse it. Once they get their mood stabilized and off the antidepressants, for example, blood pressure, then it's like, but we always want to work on other things. Remember, it's not just some people now like, well, I want to lose a little weight, or I want to look better, I want to feel better, I want to have more energy, I want to have a better libido. I mean, like the idea that the average person right now is I consider is keeping their head above water. They're just treading water every day. They're kind of not drowning, but they're barely keeping it up. And in our clinic, what we do is we don't just teach people how to swim, we teach people how to sail. That's a completely different feeling. Optimum health is a different feeling than just feeling, quote, normal. Again, normal is what? 70% obesity, 8 to 12 prescription drugs, being tired at the end of the day, not feeling good. Optimum health is a completely different thing. And it's not just taking a quick fix pill. It's doing all these right things. But there's things that we can boost, like if people have memory problems, there's things that help with the memory, there's things that help, with the libido. We can do that. As you change the functionality aspects of the epigenetics, then even the things that we give work even better because the whole foundation of health is even better. Right. So there's never a downside of changing the diet. There's just downsides of being stuck on taking pills. And even our natural pills that we give, I always want to tell people like, hey, it's helpful. They're going to have less side effects. But if you even get tired of that, then you got to go further. Right. You got to start making a little bit more changes.
You are just so passionate. I'm basically healthy, but I want to go to you because you're just so fun.
Well, I welcome, here's the thing is we can do a consultation and then you can see what the experience is. Also, particularly with the testing, because here's the thing, even though I'm plant-based, even though you're plant-based, even though you're chef and also, doesn't mean that we're perfect. We all can have microbiome problems. We've all had antibiotics in the past or got sick on a cruise or got a virus or, whatever it might be. Right. So it's looking at like, what nutrients do you need? Because a lot of people will take, I'll give you an example. A lot of people will take supplements and they just take it. Oh, this is good for me. This is good for me. Well, do you need it? Like, shouldn't we be looking food as medicine first? And then should be focusing on telling you what foods you should be eating if you have a deficiency? And the things that are more difficult to eat or is harder to get from the food, then that's when supplementation is important because then we can actually improve a deficiency. But then when people take things, they actually will have the benefit. Like they'll say, I feel better, right? The problem is most people come in and I don't feel good. And they'll have bags of this and bags of that. And you're like, well, what's going on? Like, I don't feel good. I mean, obviously, but we want to look at like targeted therapies. And so that's where, my expertise in looking at herbal medicines and things like the bosmeric, the glucan, there's certain things that we know, like, can we keep your immune system strong right now as you're changing? Yes. Can we get inflammation down right now, rather than you reaching for an ibuprofen, Motrin, or Advil right now? If you have a headache, if you got back pain, if you have arthritis, can you take something like bosmeric? Absolutely. Is it safe and effective? Yes, yes, yes. But then we have to ask, why do you need to take this and investigate what are those triggers that are coming in that's causing it?
Nice, thanks. So a lot of people have GI questions. Can you work with people with like IBS and SIBO and Crohn's and ulcerative colitis and
yes,
diarrhea?
we do tons of that. And in fact, and it's a challenge because I'll give you an example. When we do the SIBO testing, we do the stool testing, we look at, gut dysbiosis, leaky gut, inflammatory markers, overgrowths, et cetera, the absorption problems. So some people can be eating perfectly healthy diets, still have malabsorptions or dysfunctions of the gut. Most people are just completely off. But what we have to do is we have to restore it. So there's protocols, but a lot of times people want to take everything at one time. But clinically, you have to understand, like, there's ways that you have to do stepwise. right? And that's the clinical practice part that a lot of people unfortunately don't have in functional medicines, because they're like, here's a test, here's your problem, here's a product. I'm like, there's a little bit more challenge to that. And if we don't get the diet correct, then the problem will then come back again. They become like what they call a recurrent, or the recycling patient, where they feel better for a while and then they have more dysfunction or problems. So we always want to improve that function. Yes, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, bowel function problems are probably the easiest things to fix. They're also the easiest things to become dysfunctional, because we can put the wrong food in. So without testing for food sensitivities and microbiome problems, then although they have wonderful products that, say, from the other providers that will kind of help and maintain them, we want to actually get the body to be healed as much as possible, so that we're not taking these things indefinitely, even if they are natural.
Great, thank you. So Melanie says, do you work with all ages, or does someone have to be an adult?
I predominantly work with adults, but for children, when I see children, it's predominantly for the food sensitivities and gut issues. They have to be older than 2 for the testing to be anywhat accurate. So I usually, I don't do well child checks. I'm not a pediatrician, so I don't do any of the, the normal, like if you went for your well child check. But when people come in and say, my kid usually has asthma, allergy, they have gut issues, they have eczema, they have, those things, definitely we help all ages.
Nice. Okay. Liz is saying, can you repeat that? Was it Bosmeric for inflammation? What is
Bosmeric, BOSMERIC.com, or Bosmeric SR. It's a sustained release form. Interesting thing is, I was the first person to bring to the market the combination of the curcumin, the boswellia, the ginger, the black pepper. This is 16 years ago. Like, people didn't want to talk, now, like, you look on the Amazon, like, boom, everybody's selling turmeric. But when you look at the products, I'll give you an example. The top 2 selling products of turmeric right now on Amazon, when you analyze the product, they sell from 1995. Their base cost, and they're saying that 95% curcuminoids, is not real. It's actually costs less than $3 with the product, including in the bottle and the packaging, when you investigate it. So 43% of all the turmeric products in the market is actually synthetic curcuminoids. Okay. And so we have to be really cautious. So now there's people like selling like fermented turmeric. No, there's all this like, piperine is dangerous. No, it's not. Anybody who tells you black pepper is dangerous, anybody tell you that you need to ferment your turmeric, they didn't do it for thousands of years. There's like one rat study. No, we want studies that are like, I have 165 published studies on the right form of curcumin that we're using at the dose that we need to see. It's a compendium of that in peer-reviewed, published. They're not like funded studies. They're not some kind of advertorial. Like, here's the compendium. Here's the study. Like, here's what MD Anderson, NIH, here's the universities, what they're doing. And that's why when we look at how do we give things in conjunction with other drugs, say, for example, what can we give with the chemo, or what can we give? Like, one of the doctors at this plant-based conference recently said, she was a little nervous. She's like, well, curcumin might have an effect with this type of chemotherapy. And it's like, well, because she didn't do any research on that. But I'm like, but there's a double-blinded randomized controlled study. It was just published just recently, showing that it actually had a synergistic effect. So these are things like, when we saw it in a cell culture, there might have been some caution. So we always got to take caution when there's a little bit of data to say, okay, I'm always conservative when it comes to being cautious. But when I actually have data now saying like, okay, now we have in real people, double-blinded randomized controlled study, using it with the chemotherapy, showing a synergy, meaning that they did better with it than without it, then we should be recommending it. But since it's not a drug, then doctors feel nervous about recommending, right? Same thing with plant-based diet. Like, sometimes they feel nervous because it's not coming from a pharmaceutical company, but we can help people with that. And so bosmeric.com, Bosmeric is our anti-inflammatory that I recommend. I tell everybody, if you just replace that in your house for an ibuprofen, Motrin, if that's the minimum you do, start with that first, because then you'll realize the power of plants. And if you feel like, wow, I take this, I feel better, then say, what about all the rest of the things that Chef AJ and her show's been talking about for the longest time, eating plant-based foods? It only gets better from there.
Right. Great. Let's see who the person that asked the question is. Basically, do you take any kind of insurances, and how expensive is the testing that you're probably going to recommend for many people?
So 2 things. We don't take insurance. I've never taken insurance for the last 22 years, thankfully. And the reason being is because I spend usually 2 to 3 hours with each patient. And then I'm not dictated by an insurance company. Well, depending on your disease, will then have the algorithm like, I can only prescribe you this, or I can prescribe you that. I'm out of that system. So I'm practicing what we call evidence-based medicine, where I can follow whatever the latest guidelines or the latest research will show, rather than what your insurance company, through a bean counter, through a lawyer or an accountant, has decided. Not a physician, by the way. So no, we don't take insurance. Now, we do submit, I'm an out-of-network provider, so we do submit, we can give you a super bill. And if you met your deductible and you're out-of-network, have some coverage, it can cover some of that. On the lab testing, we usually look at when it's routine blood work. So like your CBC, your liver, your kidney, CMP, your thyroid, free T3, free T4, TSH, vitamin D, your lipid panel, your hormones, all that stuff. That's usually covered by your insurance. So LabCorp or Quest, we write that that's usually covered because that's usually what I consider primary care. So even though I'm not in the network per se, that's between the lab company and the insurance company. That's usually covered by primary care labs. When it comes to some of the functional testing, that's between the lab company and the patient. So our staff will just tell you, like, here's the price, send it usually anywhere from $150 to $300, $400 depending on the test. But I have a lot. Remember, I'm the 50th poorest state, so I always start off with like, hey, these are the things I might want to get, but if we can't do that right now, let's just start off with this, or let's just start off with the dietary. Like, we don't need to have testing. Remember, clinicians know from experience what we need to do. The testing is really important because then it kind of guides and motivates the patient of what they should be doing. Just like when people see a high cholesterol level, right? They don't feel chest pain until they're clutching their chest and they're calling the emergency room. But if they see a high cholesterol test, that motivates them. So a lot of times it's getting them to actually do the dietary changes, doing the lifestyle changes. And then once they see that these things get better, it's like an added pat on their back. Like, that's that true health insurance, is by you taking care of yourself every day. No one else is going to come save you in this country. I'll tell you that. It's not the insurance company for sure. And you can't just expect a doctor or a nurse in the emergency room to save your life every single time too. So the idea is that you have to be doing your part, which is staying healthy.
Right. You had mentioned something earlier that people are asking for clarification. You called it neuroacupuncture.
Yes, neuroacupuncture. If you go to neuroacupunctureinstitute.org, O-R-G, so there's a training that there's actually the world famous acupuncturist. His name is Dr. Jason Howe, or Jensen Howe, more specifically. He wrote the famous book of scalp acupuncture. Now it's called neuroacupuncture. I trained with him at Stanford doing the specialty course in neuroacupuncture in 2006. We then, a few years later, created a nonprofit training institute where we train doctors, MDs, DOMs, acupuncturists in that. It's a level training that they go a couple of training sessions over the year. And now we're kind of doing it by Zoom and in person. There's also a video if people want to learn about it. If you go to neuroacupunctureinstitute.org, it's called Return to Life. Just watch the documentary film. That's a documentary film by Doug Dirth. He's the director who did 10,000 Needles, which was one of the most famous acupuncture films, documentaries of all time. And so he came and filmed how we help with neurological symptoms. So when people have stroke, MS, Parkinson's, for example, like Western medicine has very little for that. We're really good at diagnosing it. So we can get an MRI, we can get a CT scan, we can do all the testing, EMGs, we can do all sorts of things and say, this is wrong with you, had a stroke or you had a traumatic brain injury. But in terms of how do we regain that function, how do we get someone to walk or talk or stop shaking, the neuroacupuncture has been found to be one of the most profound things in my practice. And when you watch the movie, you'll see it. And our goal is to train more and more physicians so that hopefully in every state, in every city, there'll be a practitioner. We don't want to see everybody. I can't see everybody. Dr. Howe can't see everybody. But there's if you go to his clinic, there's hundreds of people on a waiting list waiting to get into the clinic because sometimes it's just a few needles and the person can get out of a wheelchair and walk. They haven't walked in 12 years. So it almost sounds like, well, it's a little like, hell, is this true? No, you'll be surprised. But, it's one of the things, like, you have to be open, just like you are with diet. You have to be open to explore new avenues. And some things are not new. Traumatic brain injury is not new. We have different causes of it now, but people have been hit on the head for millennia. You know what I'm saying? So if you look at what other cultures do, and how's it different? And that's what we are. We're a specialty clinic. We can help people with that. We also, just letting you know, we also do panchakarma. People can come. We do 3 or 4 or 5 days of panchakarma detoxification. We have yoga. We have a yoga studio here. We do all the meditation, and we have flotation tank. I do the acupuncture. Maureen does the massage. Dr. Sutton. So it's a variety of aspects. You get to meet our dog, Princess Winnie. She comes to the clinic every day. So it's a community that we've built here. We teach people how to go shopping and we cooking classes. It's about moving, the community. It's not easy. You can't just go and say, oh, I'm going to be vegan tomorrow, or I'm going to just do yoga tomorrow. We all got to start as a beginner. But at the end of the day, we want gold, and we will help you get gold.
Nice. What was that quote you said again? We don't teach you how to swim. We
teach you how to sail.
That's amazing, because a lot of modern medicine actually teaches you to sink.
Yeah, and in fact, they just kind of throw you another inner tube for a while. Like, here's more inner tubes. Like, I'm drowning. Here's another inner tube. Like, well, I don't need the skill to swim a little bit. But it's not just swimming, because then what happens? A lot of people who do take their medicines correctly, right, as indicated, it's managed. So now they're floating, but they're still dependent. If they don't have that medicine, then they drown, right? So we have to change all the epigenetics, and that's what we help them do. And again, it's nice because when these are things they don't teach in medical school. They don't teach the word healing. The word cure is not in the repertoire of our consciousness, and so therefore the patient never actually understands that they actually can heal themselves. You just have to change all the epigenetic environment and diet, lifestyle, and belief system. And you got to use it by food, and you got to take, and it takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. People are not going to be like, okay, I just lost 100 pounds or I'm off my antidepressants, but you can get people off of these things and change the benefits. And so I tell people, if you didn't get here overnight, so don't expect it to happen overnight, but things will happen very quickly. And it's as fast as they want to put into it, is as fast. The more you train, the faster you're into Olympics, and the more you train, the better the score, the better the gold.
It almost seems like where it comes to chronic disease, of course, modern medicine is fantastic when you're in a car accident,
Right.
or have a cut. But when it comes to chronic disease, it almost seems like the goal is to make you fatter and sicker and live longer in a state of debility.
Yeah. So there's a term that I like to use, is called health span. We want to improve your health span. What the health span means this. Right now, there's a word called longevity. They're trying to make people live longer, but what happens is they're living longer, but they're doing this. They're slowly decreasing, right? Their quality of life is going down. So what happens is people get older, they become more disabled, then they end up living like in a nursing home, and then, this, and then eventually in some kind of dementia ward. So it's kind of like the step down. They call it step down units. Health span is like going as far as you can and then dropping. Right. So you don't want to be having because most people oh, my parents lived to 80 years old or early 90s, but it started in the 70s where it started this downhill, right? Or more debilitating, more this. So it's just like a hospitalization, nursing care, blah, blah, blah. You want to be I tell people like this, if I'm kind of dating myself, but Thelma and Louise, I remember that movie. You want to be, Gina Davis and who's the other lady? I forget the other actress name.
Sarandon.
Yeah, Susan Sarandon, and with Brad Pitt in the back, and you want to go off the cliff at the very end. That's it. It's you want to go as far as you can for as long as you can with the highest quality of life. Quantity of life is not as important as quality of life. I've obviously want you to live long, but we want you to live long and healthy, where you can do everything that you want to do all the time, rather than being dependent. You want to be independent, and that's what health span is helping people do.
I normally don't have time to rewatch my shows, but there's so much information here that I'm going to have to rewatch this one because.
Thank you. I find that as a great compliment.
So Elaine says, what do you think of green tea?
I love green tea. Green tea is great because of the following. It has a high amount of EGCGs, which is the antioxidants that we find for all the benefits from cancer otherwise. Also, it has a component called L-theanine, which actually is derivative. It's fermented as vermouth, and we actually offer that. That helps put the brain in the alpha state, which is the kind of focused, relaxed, calm state. The only thing with green teas I recommend with all teas and coffees is making sure that you get it organic. It's one of the most heavily sprayed commodities is teas and coffees. And so I'm a big organic believer. I know that some people in the plant-based movement say, well, organic's too expensive. It's too expensive. There's again, access and all. But I'm looking at, you got to invest in your health. If you're going to buy something, your food is medicine. You don't want to buy cheap stuff. You want to, it doesn't have to be super expensive, but try to get organic. There's, you can go on stores, and then Costco's even have organic stuff. So it's worth it, especially when it comes to the coffee and tea. Even with coffee beans need to be organic. Otherwise, it's heavily sprayed. They're concentrating it down with high water pressure and temperature. And then you're just getting a cup of Joe with a bunch of chemicals in there.
Wow. I just started doing green tea because I found a decaffeinated brand, Essentia, made by Say Me, that because I can't do any caffeine. And so I'm taking it every day, just, because.
No, it's good. I mean, it's got wonderful health benefits. The problem is the average person thinking of a Starbucks kind of green tea, which is then full of sugar, cream, and all that. That's not what green tea is. That's why they drink little cups. But the data shows when they drink 6-8 cups the size, it has wonderful health benefits. So yeah, green tea definitely have that. I like all the teas, by the way. I'm a connoisseur of tea. Some people call me a coffee snob as well. Because I grind my beans. I get the type of beans and how I even make my coffee. Just to let you know, AJ, in the morning, I put ground cardamom. I put saffron, and this is real saffron, real cardamom, not the fake stuff that you get at the store. I use there's Diaspora, there's brands that, are fair trade, and they use small farms and, all these initiatives and organic and all. I use cinnamon, and I put a little bit of dandy blend, which is roasted chicory and, in the dandelion root and all, which is more of a inulin, and it's more of a prebiotic, makes it more alkaline. And so, I throw a lot of those kind of things into my coffee every day. So it's actually making it more medicinal. So it's not just, oh, the phytonutrients, and the cholesterolic acids of coffee. It's actually adding the spices to the coffee, and then that I don't need to use as much sweetener because I already have the cinnamon in there. So these are all the things that people need to understand. Like, you can do small little things with spices, and we didn't get to talk about it, but spices are important, and that's one thing, unfortunately, in the plant-based movement, which I'm starting to see now more importantly though than it did in a couple of years ago, is that we're now talking about flavors of food. We're talking about cuisine. We're looking at, every culture has their spices and herbs. And a lot of times, plant-based I thought was really boring here because it was just kind of like, here's, didn't have any flavor, and I'm like, but if you're in Asia, if you're in Africa, if you're in South America, if you're in Mexico, if you're, somewhere in Europe, they're using all these wonderful herbs and spices. So I let people know, like, there's even books written on spices now, and Dr. Agarwal, had that wonderful book on spices, and he goes through all the inflammatory processes and all the research they did at MD Anderson on each of those, plant medicines, and how to store it, how to keep it, how to cook with it, add a little bit in your food all the time.
Nice. That's great. So I want to respect your time. How long would you like to go?
I can go as long as you want. I'm okay.
Okay. Well, I think in about 3 hours I have an appointment. No,
sure.
Just kidding. No, we're not going to go. This might be the longest episode ever, which again, you're a 3-time award winner. This is great.
I'm going for gold. Only the gold.
So Dina has a question. What about the cardiologist's recommendation to take a baby aspirin?
So here's a very great question. Excellent question. This is probably one of the most important questions to hear today. Why? Because we've all been told to take a baby aspirin, right? Take an aspirin a day, keeps the doctor away or whatever, right? Should be the apple, not the aspirin. Here's the interesting thing. So we used to give a recommendation, meaning the medical conventional world, used to say, take an aspirin a day will help prevent a risk of heart attack or stroke. So we call it primary prevention, meaning the patient has not had an event before. Would it prevent that first stroke or first heart attack? And there's now 3 comprehensive studies been published in, like big journals like JAMA and all these big journals. And it shows that actually it doesn't do that. In fact, that more people die from a GI bleed taking a baby aspirin than preventing the primary heart attack from happening to begin with. So it's no longer the recommendation for taking a baby aspirin. Now, once someone has had a heart attack or a stent, then the data shows that it does have a preventative benefit for the second one. Okay, but that's still a whole dietary issue why we need to take it to begin with that they haven't addressed. That's why they need to take it once they had the stent. So there's a little bit of, what came first. But yeah, you don't want to do that. Now, if there's people still have risk of clots or still, they're still pro-inflammatory, say they're obese, they have other issues, maybe they have whatever, right? So how do you look at the pharmacology? Is the pharmacology of an 81 baby aspirin, the pharmacology of the platelet inhibition, meaning the thinness of the blood, it lasts about 7 to 10 days pharmacologically. So if you're still like, I need to take my aspirin because I just grew up and I just love Bayer aspirin and the commercials are so driving me to take this, then taking 1 a week would give you the same benefit and lower your risk of the GI bleed. But in my perspective, there's no reason to be taking it at all if there's risk. You're trying to be reducing, because the last thing you want to do is like, I go plant-based, I do all these wonderful things, I'm yoga, I'm losing weight, I'm feeling great. I just take a baby aspirin because it's super cheap. I can get it in 2,000 bottle at the store. And then I have a heart attack or a stroke or more importantly, a GI bleed, which most people have. The aspirin blocks the receptors in the stomach that make that mucus lining. And so although it does help with the pain and inflammation in the joints, what happens is by lowering the it's a COX-1 inhibitor, it blocks the receptor in the stomach that makes the mucus lining. So then when there's gastritis, which most people have inflammation of their stomach, alcohol, tobacco, coffee, just too much acidic things, pro-inflammatory, standard lifestyle foods, and stress, they get an ulcer. Then that lining in the stomach bleeds and they're on a blood thinner, so they die from the GI bleed. So that's why I preferably avoid the baby aspirin unless someone has been told by the cardiologist since they had a heart attack or a stroke or a stent. That's another discussion. But if it's for primary prevention, I would be doing everything else. Now, for example, if someone's taking a Bosmeric, does that lower inflammation? Yes. Does it thin your blood? No. Does a plant-based diet prevent your blood from clotting and thin your blood naturally? Yes, because you're not eating pro-inflammatory foods that cause clotting. So like all these things are natural lowering the clot risk. It's just the problem is that we're in such a pro-inflammatory state. Like I showed that first thing about obesity and inflammation causing the cells to be more sticky. So that's why they have to take the aspirin. But you don't have to take the aspirin if you're eating a healthy diet.
Great, terrific. And another question on bone density, other than not being overweight and doing weight-bearing exercises, any foods you recommend for building bone density?
Yeah, bone density is very interesting because now we're understanding that, particularly from a supplement standpoint and dietary standpoint, you got to be avoiding dairy. You've got to be avoiding dairy. The higher amount of dairy the person consumes, the more the bone loss. So the countries, United States, and like Finland and all these other countries that the top three that consume dairy, remember 2 pounds per day per person, we have the highest osteoporosis rates in the world. And every country that eats less dairy, they have less osteoporosis. So even if we go to another country, I do a bone density test for a patient who's 85 years old and they consume very little to no dairy, their bone density is normal. They don't have osteopenia or osteoporosis. And here it's like we just think that as we get older, everybody gets this condition. There is things like, when we look at silica is important. So like things like in celery and things like that, are very good at those kind of aspects. I still recommend if people have bone density issues, there is like certain type of bone formulas that we do provide. There's even a Chinese herbal formula that just came out 3 months ago in the research. They actually did a comparative study to Fosmax, which is pretty interesting, the gold standard of prescription drugs. And they ran the bone density before. They gave the Fosmax for one group, and one group they gave the Chinese herbal formula. And the Chinese herbal formula did the same without the side effects. So I'm like, well, there you go. That's a great study to have comparing to a pharmaceutical drug. So there is natural things that we have that are herbal medicines that actually can help, but trying to avoid the foods that contribute to inflammation is the thing that actually accelerates the bone density loss.
Terrific. So, this question was coming. I told you all our guests get asked this. What does Dr. Pai eat for a day, and what do you do for exercise?
All right. So to be honest, I need to exercise more. I do yoga. And I do walking twice a day with my dog because that's a must. So I get my
particular kind of yoga because there's so many.
Yeah, we do hatha yoga. We do the meditation. We do the pranayama. We do basically sun salutation every day, minimally. And so we try to teach our patients just doing a sun salutation and to do several rounds of sun salutation. Remember, yoga's preparation to meditation. So that's why when you do the meditation, you end in, you do the yoga, you end up in meditation. I do walking at least 20, 30 minutes twice a day with my dog. That's the minimum that's recommended for exercise, keeping them, we're not supposed to be sitting in a chair for, 8 hours a day. That's the new smoking, as they call it. So doing 20 minutes twice a day of just general walking is the most important, probably the most important thing everybody can do. Yoga is important because you can increase not only your bone density, your blood pressure, and also improves natural killer cell function, lowers inflammation. But more importantly, you're learning how to balance and flexibility. So one of the things that the drugs, I'm a little offside here, I'll get back to my diet real quick, but on the bone density issue is that the drugs nor the herbs or the supplements prevent you from falling. The number one cause that we need to look at is, why do people fall? And nobody talks about that. So drug companies will sell billions of dollars of drugs. People still are in the hospitals with hip fractures. In 20 years, the rate and risk of hip fracture has stayed the same, has not gone down. Why? Because we never address the thing that is strength flexibility. Right. And so it's not just going to the gym and working out. It's like, that's where yoga comes into play. That's where like Tai Chi, Qigong, these are things that when you're more flexible against gravity, then you know how to get up. You need to know how to bend down. You need how to flex and stretch. It's not just how much you can, curl. That's not as important. So you always have to look at how you lower your risk of falling. Okay. Now, I want to
ask you, how good are these for our health?
Dogs actually wonderful. And in fact, there was a whole lecture at the ICNM conference on having dogs and your health. So this is like a CME conference because the data is so strong now. We can give you formal medical education credit saying you should have a pet. Your longevity goes down. Your inflammation. Remember, the love that an animal gives. It's unbelievable, right? Like, good day, bad day, pandemic, no pandemic, vaccination, not vaccinated, politics, not. Your dog just is happy to see you, just wants to be with you. Our dog comes to our clinic. She's an English Staffordshire Bull Terrier. She's got great energy. She will lay at the patient's foot if they're feeling sick. She already knows that they're not feeling well. If my dog, for example, comes and she doesn't want to sit next to someone and she avoids them at all costs, then it's going to be a tough consult for me because the energy of the patient I already know is going to be very resistive for change. It's very interesting. So animals are great. I recommend. The thing is interesting is that we should also be looking at what we're feeding our pets. Okay, that's a whole other discussion. Maybe we can do a whole other show about foods.
Yeah,
but there's a whole issue of like why dogs have diabetes and blood pressure and arthritis because they're eating the same standard American diet foods because we sell in the packages. This is what your dog should be eating: bacon and chicken, and it's like that's not necessarily true.
Right. Well, what I was thinking is rather than just keeping you ad infinitum, having you come back because people are wanting you to come back. You could talk about spices. You could talk about
Sure.
anything you really want.
I can talk about anything. Like you can, I can be like a regular every once in a while. Just like, hey,
no, honestly,
you're running out of topics. I'll be glad to, I'll be glad to fill in because there's so many things that people. Here's the thing: is I want people to understand this. Like, although the diet's important, right? It's the foundation. Sometimes it's like getting you to the diet is by doing other things, right? So if I did a little yoga, I feel better. Okay, now it's maybe easier. My pain's better. I sleep better, or maybe I'm drinking cleaner water, or maybe I'm doing some community service. Maybe I'm practicing some kind of faith or spiritual practice, whatever it may be, or just just being one with yourself or the environment. It's important to do those things. If you get to that center of being whole, then wholeness and holistic health is just it's a easy segue into it. And so don't feel always like if I'm stuck on the diet, like the person who's stuck on like the A2 and the eggs and the chicken, she's really stuck on that. So what we have to look at in all the other 9 steps in my book, how to start doing those and then eventually start lowering the amounts of intake to this. And she will get there. People will get there because once you start feeling better, you don't want, remember, you don't go for the gold. You don't go for the gold. You don't go for bronze and silver, and you'll never be happy. No one remembers a bronze or silver. Like I can't name any bronze or silver person at the Olympics in any of the Olympics I've ever watched, right? But everybody remembers the golds because they're the ones who get the commercials. They're the ones who are on TV. They're the ones on the box. They're the ones who get endorsements. So that's what you're going for. You want to have that legacy. The legacy is being pride of your community, the example of healing and health, being a wonderful person to help your neighbors, varying. These are things. So I always let people, like when the diet's stuck, I don't drive it so hard on them. I want to work on all these other things because as they start realizing, then it's easy to let go of some of these vices and some of these misperceptions or addictions that we might have to certain foods.
Absolutely. Well, let's finish up if you don't mind because we want to know what you eat. And do you cook for yourself?
I cook partially. My partner, she cooks most of it. I have to give her the credit. She's the better of the chef than I do. I do more of the Indian cooking. She does more of the Italian and everything else. We both do Mexican food wonderfully. In the morning, so usually I have a smoothie. So usually I don't know if you can see it, but I don't know. It's hard to see, but
you're using a virtual screen.
Yeah, I'm a virtual screen. So anyways, I usually do a smoothie. The reason why I do a smoothie in the morning is because I have difficulty of getting a lot of fruit in my lunch. I have fantastic breakfasts and I have fantastic dinners. Perfect. Lunches, I'm a little bit off. And the reason being is we don't have a big kitchen here in our office. And I'm usually running over because I'm with patients. I'm spending a lot more time. So it's a little bit like my lunch kind of suffers. So how do I get to my 4 servings of fruit or more a day is I really try to cram those, like the fruits in my smoothie. This morning, I actually have jackfruit in my smoothie, like the sweet jackfruit. I have berries in my, blueberries, mangoes, strawberries, jackfruit. I put a little bit of vegan protein powder. I put organic soy milk in there as well. The protein powder is pumpkin, brown rice, hemp, I believe, and so that's just I have a piece of sprouted grain toast, and I put a little bit of nut butter. I'm allergic to nuts, so I miss out on all the wonderful cashews and all these wonderful vegan things. So I use sunflower butter. Again, and even when I get the sunflower butter, it's organic and it's no oil added, no sugar added. So it's just straight. Now, the interesting thing is it'll be like $9 a bottle versus like $4 a bottle organic, but then it's oil, right? Then it's like, as you mentioned, it's like a filler. So then it's just fat calories you don't need. So I usually have that for breakfast, or I usually have like a bowl. I make a breakfast bowl, like an acai bowl, like a with granola and all the berries in there, or I make like a lot of South Indian dishes. So we'd have like a something called poha. It's like it's a flattened beaten rice kind of dish. So we eat a lot of, like, sometimes I tell people, remember that the data showed on this conference, breakfast should be the biggest meal. Believe it or not, when they did the studies at PCRM and they did all the energetic calories and how do we lose weight, breakfast should be, eat like a king, Prince for lunch and Popper for dinner. That the data now is showing that, like, we should be eating a biggest breakfast.
That's so hard, Dr. Pai. I've never been hungry. I even tried fasting once for 40 hours and I still don't get hungry until about.
Yeah, I know it's tough. And then, a lot of people Ayurvedically, when we look at their body type, they're not hungry till like mid-afternoon. So there is some unique physiological challenges here that we work with people, but just letting you know, like, breakfast is a good, it's an important thing, especially people who are trying to lose weight. That's not your problem. That's not, but people who need to lose weight, because what happens is our biggest meal is usually dinner and then they go to bed. So you're not expending any of those calories. Okay. So breakfasts are usually like the breakfast bowl and stuff. Now I'll give you an example though, for my cheat day. Every 2 weeks, I do a vegan standard American breakfast. I do a just egg scramble. I use my tempeh bacon. I use, organic hash browns. I do the whole I grew up in America, so that's the kind of thing I feel like I need to do every 2 weeks. Just don't ask me why, but organic pancakes, blah blah blah, real maple syrup. Just kind of that whole okay, I'm a blueberry pancakes with cardamom. I make everything kind of like really nice. But anyways, that I did. There's that one day that is not people see my Instagram like these beautiful bowls, and there's always what's going to be like every 2 weeks. It's going to be like, hey, isn't that kind of like something that you went at someone's house or grandmother's on the weekend? Yeah, plant-based.
Maybe you'll do a cooking demo sometime.
Yeah, I would, and I'll even show you how to make my coffee and everything. And then for lunches, lunches are usually going to be something that's going to be a little bit more. Everything's plant based though. But I usually have leftovers, or we try to pre-make something here. It's not I don't have that fruit option. A lot of beans, a lot of legumes, a lot of grains, because that's stuff that we can easily make. We have rice cookers and Instant Pots and all those other things like that. I avoid microwave like the plague. Okay, so I don't cook with the microwave. I heat up water every once in a while if I don't have a kettle here, stuff like that. But we just avoid as much as possible. Dinners are fantastic. So when I tell people eat plant-based, it's not eating salad. If they're eating Mexican food, then we're eating, vegan Mexican food or plant-based Mexican food. If it's Italian food, if it's Thai food, if it's American fare, whatever the food that they're eating, what we teach our clients now is what is a substitute? What is a substitute? How do we make that taco? How do we make a burger? How do we make the enchiladas? How do we make the pasta? How do we make it plant-based so that we're removing some? And then, is there substitutes that we can offer in? Yes. And eventually, can we avoid some of these other substitutes or get even cleaner, more fresher, natural substitutes for that? Absolutely. And once you get people to eat that way, then you just become accustomed of eating that way. It's a transition. So I always tell people small baby steps. Let's start off with one meal a day, then go to meatless Mondays, and then do it 2 to 3 times a week. The data is fantastic if you do that. And again, it's not being perfect. I don't eat any animal protein, so I just don't, for all sorts of reasons. More now for the environment, more for the animals and everything else than in my health, because my health is spectacular now. So I'm not worried about I have to lower my cholesterol or anything like that. But for all these other reasons, for all the younger kids and younger generations that they will have to deal with this climate change issue because our generation didn't take care of things. That's one way that we can help with improving those things is by not eating those foods.
Wow. Maybe we could have a regular feature, Sundays with Sunil.
I would love to. I'd love to do that. I mean, here's the thing: is I'm so open because the reason being this, people need information, right? And a lot of times people are trying to dictate, you must do this. It's no, I'm recommending what you should be doing, but everybody has their own. I'm an Eastern guy, by the way, even though I'm born here and I'm raised here, and from south of New Mexico and all. Now I'm in Albuquerque, but I'm I also believe in karma. Everybody has their own karma. You got to learn it now, you got to learn it later. That's my perception, right? And hopefully, I'm not sitting behind the desk again on the next life, going through this whole this whole discussion, and and it's not being perfect. I think the problem with the plant-based movement, especially on social media, just to be before we finish, is that there's a high perfectionist, I look like this, I'm a model, I eat plant-based. I think that's putting too much stress on people, like this image issue and being this perfectionist. I always tell my patients, you're traveling, you're driving through the middle of Texas, you're gonna have to stop somewhere and eat, try to make the better decisions. Don't, there's gonna be a grandmother coming over, there's gonna be a holiday, you're gonna be traveling someplace, when in Rome, you might have to eat something. It's not the end of the world, but we don't want to make that a daily practice. And the problem is that kind of slides into when we say anything, everything in moderation. Everything in moderation didn't get us anywhere in America. And that's why we have the health problems that we have. So if we want radical change and radical improvements, there is a little bit of a radical difference of how we live our life. And so if people say, gosh, you want to be disease free, then these are the things you need to do to be disease free. And again, it's pleasurable. It's not suffering. You have a wonderful show. You're thriving. Your clients are thriving. The
my
people.
Food is. I mean, I think about that. I think because I with this pandemic, it's so many people gaining the weight. I'm but I love. Why would I want to eat that? My food is so good.
Yeah. But I think it's this. Until people achieve and actually feel optimum health, then they don't know what they're missing, right? So, and again, I can look back on myself before when I was not plant-based and I was eating clean, organic, blah blah blah, wild caught, free range food. I thought I was, my numbers weren't as great as everybody else. I mean, it was better, but it wasn't cleaner. And now my numbers are spectacular. My labs are fantastic. However, I do need to exercise more. I do have to honestly say that. And the reason being because I'm sitting on my chair doing Zoom all day long. So but it's interesting that when patients come in, this is what I made it a practice. Like I go out and I greet my patients. I go out and I meet the patients. I as much as I can get out of my chair as much throughout the day is what I like to do, because otherwise we're just kind of stuck. So, there's things that I'm always honest with my patients. I always tell them, like, I go to the health store, for example, and there's just as much of things that are vegan that are trying to tempt you, right? There's 14 flavors of Ben and Jerry's vegan ice cream. That's terrible. You know what I'm saying? Meaning good but bad, right? Because like we shouldn't be eating ice cream like that. And so there's a market. So there's vegan donuts, there's vegan Cinnabons, there's all these things that are vegan that it's still junk food. And so we have to be careful because there's chips and things, and then people can drink alcohol all day long and say it's vegan too. And so we have to be careful of not getting stuck with, because snack food industries, those food industries still want to sell us plant-based or not. And so I think I'm always honest to say hey, this is something that you're going to see in the store. It's going to come and call your name when you drive by or push your car back. Try to avoid it because their marketing is really strong. And trust me, I tried one and I couldn't stop eating it, and it was terrible. So, I try to live by example for my patients, and I hope that I can lead the example to my colleagues as well.
That's great. Linda wants to know if you use a paper coffee filter.
I actually use a espresso grinding machine. So it actually grinds it and makes it into the thing directly. So it's not a paper. I would use if I used to do grinding, like just regular coffee filters, but I would actually use the metal, the gold, and avoid the paper, unless you get the unbleached kind, but then it costs more. And then it's like, so I just use the thing. Then also you want to take the coffee grounds, you can compost those. So, all those things. The other thing is to give your audience some other options. Okay, let's talk about caffeine, because a lot of people like, what do I take, right? Because I know that you are sensitive to caffeine, but a lot of people still want to know when they come to office, like, I need my morning Joe. And say if they come back allergic to coffee, some people are allergic to the coffee bean, not the caffeine. So one of the things I do like to drink sometimes in the afternoon, and I actually have, I had some, is actually it's called a Creo Brew. Not that I want to endorse them and all, but it's you can get organic. It's just roasted cacao beans. Right. So they take the cacao beans, they roast it, and then they grind it. And then you put in your French press or your coffee machine. I do a French press. And then it has the theobromine. So that has all the natural it gives you that energy, but it doesn't give you that jitters. And so, and has that nice chocolate flavor. If you want to sweeten it with a little honey or whatever you want to do, we're fine, or whatever, soy milk, or whatever, something. But it's something like, again, if people want their, teas, the most caffeinated tea that I will use if I need a really strong boost is yerba mate. But you need to get unsmoked yerba mate. Okay, what happens is they take the plant, it's the drink of Brazil. They take it unsmoked, means they take the leaves and they dry it for 9 to 12 months in the sun, and it concentrates all the phytonutrients and antioxidants into the leaf. So you get all the health benefits plus the caffeine. Most of the products that are already in a package or are in bags, they're smoked. It means they take it, they roast it, and they just send it to market. Has a little bit of has caffeine in it, has no other health benefits. So if you actually have the real unsmoked yerba mate, it's also alkaline, it has tons of minerals and antioxidants. So that's something that, again, it's quite bitter, but it's something that people can use. I always try to get, again, organic teas, organic coffee.
Great. Listen, we're going to have you back because there's lots of questions we don't have time for today.
Sure.
On water and fasting, and people want you to talk about Ayurvedic medicine and spices.
Wonderful. I can talk about all those.
Right. Well, you're going to come back to that, but we're going to do one more question.
Sure.
From a previous guest named Bulliant, who actually made a very funny comment when you were talking about health span and lifespan. He said that the pharmaceutical companies are really, what they're doing is increasing their wealth span. So I thought
100%. I'm gonna take that. So thank you very much. In my next lecture, they are increasing the wealth span, and in the disparity between another discussion between the haves and have-nots, that it's happening. We can see it. People are going to space, and people don't have lunch to eat or dinner to eat. Right? We have homeless people. So I'm a little bit like, as people know, I'm kind of progressive. I'm a little bit aggressive in how I may speak sometimes, but because we have to make change. Like, we just can't sit there and do the same old things, because that's the definition of insanity, hitting your head against the wall over and over again. Right? We got to change. We got to move the wall, first of all, and then look at doing something else with our head. And so hopefully by these discussions, I appreciate you having me on your show. People can look at our website, sanjevani.net, SANJEVANI.net. They can look at the Bosmeric if they're interested in anti-inflammatory, bosmeric.com. and our Sanjevani store, SANJ.
Right. And if you want to give me this, because I'm happy to put anything in the show notes. It's just that I found that the links weren't clickable the way you gave them to us.
I better give that to you so you can update
that. Absolutely. I'm happy to update it. So let's end on this question because I have no idea what it means from Boyan. He says, could you please ask Dr. Pai about the saying in India about rogi versus bogi versus yogi? I don't know what that means.
I'm not sure exactly what that means. Yeah, I would have to. That's not a saying that's as familiar for me.
All right. Well, then we'll end on just a fun question that I would always love. So, last meal on earth, what are you going to have?
Last meal on earth. Tacos. I love tacos. I have probably on my Instagram, I think I have like 100 taco photos. I love vegan tacos. I love tacos. I love traditional deep like Mexico tacos, and because all the different chilies, toppings, and stuff like that.
I also see a black and white dog. Is that Winnie?
That's Winnie. That's our Princess Winnie. She runs the show.
I love tacos, but I prefer tostadas because I hate having to turn my head to eat.
Yeah. That's true.
So I like them open faced. Well, you have just been such a wonderful wealth and breadth of information and just so fun to talk to. Maybe do a cooking demo. We can see if you can cook as fast as you can talk.
Not as fast, but I'll talk fastly when I'm cooking. So yes, thank you very much. I thanks everybody for listening, and I look forward to talking to you in the future.
It was just wonderful connecting with you. And thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. Please come back tomorrow when my guest is Pericles Silva. He is the chef at Green Fair Restaurant in Virginia, which is one of the only SOS-free restaurants that I've ever heard of. Take care, Dr. Pai. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Best of health.